Okay, you can go ahead, Mr. Shanes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hereby call to order the City of Ithaca Board of Zoning Appeals meeting for October 6, 2020. The board operates under the provisions of the Ithaca City Charter, Ithaca Zoning Ordinance, Ithaca Sign Ordinance, and the board's own rules and regulations, which is a comprehensive description of the board's membership criteria, responsibilities, and activities. It is available from the zoning division. The board comprises 5 members, nominated by the mayor and approved by Common Council. Board members present tonight are Stephen Wolf, Suzanne Charles, and Stephanie Egan Engels, as well as Megan Wilson, Senior Planner and Secretary to the board. I am Teresa Deschênes, Acting Chairperson of the board. The Secretary to the board, Megan Wilson, will call each case in the order listed on the agenda. Appellants will then have a maximum of 5 minutes to present new material or highlight aspects of their appeal. Board members may question appellants on any areas requiring clarification. Full consideration of appeals requires a public hearing, deliberation, and then voting by the board. These actions occur only after the appellant has filed appropriate documents with the zoning division and planning and development board. Public hearings include testimony from, quote, interested parties, unquote. The board considers interested parties persons who live or work or own property within 750 feet of the property, or who are authorized representatives of recognized adjacent neighborhood civics groups, or who are elected city officials. Board members may question testifying interested parties on any areas requiring clarification. Persons who do not meet the board's interested party definition will not be heard, except that an interested party may designate an agent to speak in place of the interested party and on the interested party's behalf. Interested parties supporting an appeal will testify first, followed by interested parties in opposition. Comments from each interested party are limited to 3 minutes. Appellants will then be allowed to rebut the testimony of opposing interested parties or to request adjournment to obtain evidence necessary for rebuttal. Appellants' comments must be limited to strict rebuttal of the issues raised by those opposed and will be limited to 5 minutes. A timer will sound at the end of each speaker's allotted time. While we do not adhere to strict rules of evidence, we do consider this a quasi-judicial proceeding, and we base our decisions on the official record. The official record consists of application materials filed with the zoning division, correspondence relating to cases received by the zoning division, the planning and development board's own findings and recommendations, if any, and the record of tonight's meeting. An audio recording is being made of this meeting. Therefore, it is essential anyone wanting to be heard speak clearly, so their comments are recorded and heard by everyone. Extraneous comments will neither be recorded nor considered by the board. We ask everyone to limit their comments to the zoning issues of each appeal and not comment on matters beyond the board's jurisdiction. Following the appellant's rebuttal, the appeal hearing will be closed and the board will begin deliberation. The board is required to render a decision within 62 days of the public hearing's closure. Once the hearing is closed, no further testimony will be taken. It takes 3 votes to approve a motion to grant a variance or favorable interpretation. In the event of a tie vote, an appeal is denied. Tonight's online meeting format requires us to manage public comment differently, but the board still welcomes input from interested parties. Tonight's appeals are available for public review on the city website, and the meeting is being streamed live online via YouTube. Interested parties are welcome to address the board as part of this online meeting or may submit written comments to be read into the record during the public hearing. Megan, would you kindly call the first case?
I'm admitting some of our applicants into the room right. Bear with me one moment.
Okay, I'm on for the second.
Oh, sorry, I clicked the wrong button. I'll
That's okay. It's good to see
send you
everybody.
back out.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. All right, so appeal number 3164 for 215 East State Street. Appeal of property owner Ithaca Properties LLC for an area variance from section 325.8, column 8, number of stories, column 9, height in feet, in column 14, 15, rear yard requirements of the zoning ordinance. The applicant proposes to construct a new mixed-use building at 215 East State Street. The property is a through parcel with frontage on both the Commons, East State Street, and East Green Street, and is currently occupied by a commercial building on the Commons side and the eastern third of the Green Street parking garage on the East Green Street side. The applicant proposes to demolish the eastern third of the Green Street parking garage and construct a new building on the portion of the site currently occupied by the garage. The existing commercial building on the Commons will be retained. The new building will provide 200 residential units and 3 levels of structured parking. The new parking decks will connect to the center section of the Green Street parking garage, and the new building will connect to the existing commercial structure to provide an interior pedestrian corridor between East Green Street and the Commons. The proposed building will be 14 stories and will exceed the 12 stories allowed by the zoning ordinance. The proposed building will also exceed the maximum height of 140 feet with a height of 156 feet 10 inches at the top of the elevator tower. The applicant seeks the additional building height to accommodate the parking decks, connect to the existing commercial building for pedestrian access, and provide a rooftop terrace for residential tenants. In addition, the applicant proposes to construct the building at the rear property line on East Green Street, providing 0 feet of the required 10-foot rear yard. The elimination of the rear yard on this site is intended to create a consistent street line among existing and other proposed buildings on East Green Street and to activate the streetscape. The applicants attended the September 1st, 2020 meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals. The board conducted the public hearing and then tabled the application to allow the applicant and city staff additional time to submit information on the proposed public benefits of the project, the need for the requested height variance, background on the recent changes to downtown zoning in the city's requirements for the project. The property is located in the CBD 60 and CBD 140 use districts in which the proposed use is permitted. However, section 325.32 requires that an area variance be granted before a building permit is issued.
Thank you. So since this is a continuation, I'm not entirely familiar with the procedure. I know it's not to do the 5 minutes or whatever, but you tell me the procedure and I will just follow it.
So we did have some additional information that was submitted at the board's request, and I would recommend that the applicants and city staff could provide a bit of an overview on the information that was submitted to help address questions, and then the board could ask questions and then continue the deliberation. We did conduct the public hearing at the last meeting. We held it and closed it. However, we did receive one letter from the Downtown Ithaca Alliance before tonight's meeting, and it is up to the board at this point whether you would like to consider that since the public hearing has been closed.
I'm not sure I saw that one, but
I did not send it until the board decided whether they were going to accept the letter or not, since the hearing had been closed.
okay, so first, should we decide that? First, should we hear from, I know there was something from Nell specifically about this building. First, should we hear from the applicant? What
Sure.
do you? All
Megan,
right.
we have a couple people that got,
Okay, I was going to ask you if I got everyone in from your team. We have a pretty full waiting room tonight.
I'll tell you the people that are sitting out there: John Abesh,
Oh, yep, got him.
Jared Hutter, and I don't know if Brian Rosen is on or not, but
Got it. They're all on their way in. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe we'll hear from their team first, and then we'll hear from, I think it was Nels who wrote us a letter of background on this. Is that correct? And then if you think there's anyone else, and then we can talk about the Downtown Ithaca Alliance. So welcome. And why don't you just, you have 3 people? Is that what I heard?
now there's like 5. So I'll just do introductions again. So we
All right.
appreciate you having us. I'm James Trasher from CHA, for the project engineer. John Abesh is from BSB Design, who's the project architect. Actually, we only have 4 people because I don't see Brian Rosen, but we have Jared Hutter and Jeff Rimlin from the joint venture group that is the development team. So we're pleased that we're back here tonight and to talk about the 3 variances that we're looking for. Rear yard setback from 215 East State Street out to Green Street from 10 feet to 0 to be consistent with the other buildings. So we're really going from the Commons street front line on 215 East State Street to Green Street. A proposed variance for the height of the building from 140 feet to the majority of the building being 142.6, and the top of the elevator tower in the center of the building to 156 feet. And then the last one being the instead of 12 floors, 14 floors, 3 levels of which would be public parking, 10 levels which would be residential living, and then the roof would be classified as a floor under building code because of the rooftop patio amenity making 14 floors. I'll kick it over to Jared Hutter to give you a couple-minute overview of our public benefits and what we're bringing to the table as part of this project.
Thank you, James. So, obviously, pursuant to our last meeting when we spoke to you guys about a month ago, I think the conversation really centered around, why ultimately did we need this extra story, and what was the purpose really of how we came about this. So, I think the history here, a brief thing about this is going to make sense, and that the parking garage is really in disrepair, and ultimately that needs to be replaced. That thing is past its useful life, and the city does not have the funds to do that. So that's how the history of this project came about. And if you look back, the agreement that was ultimately signed with the city back in some mid 2019 referenced 10 stories of residential on top of the existing garage. And the truth is, our building, we have to match up with the existing garage. So the 10 stories on top of that is what puts that at the 14. When you think about what the economic benefits are of this project and the public benefits are, I have a list here that I think really lays them out perfectly. Number one, we're going to spur economic activity in the downtown Commons area. We're bringing 200 plus people to live here, shop here, spend money here, and be here on a regular basis. It's going to add more high quality housing to the downtown residential core, which in turn adds to the tax base for the city. A brand new garage that is going to be for public benefit, hourly, daily parking for everybody. Creating a really good walkway from Green Street to the Commons. Outdoor space on the top of the building, which obviously, as we mentioned, that changes the number of floors. But we look at that, we could get rid of that to satisfy a floor number. But truthfully, I think I'd rather invest in that for the benefit of the residents living there. And then ultimately the additional workforce housing that this project is going to bring to the downtown area, as this will have, about 10% affordable component, minimum 10% affordable component to the project. So there's more workforce housing that are coming there. So I think when you guys are looking and evaluating, the overall public benefits of what this project brings, it really outweighs the number of floors, which is somewhat of an arbitrary number in this case, given the fact that the roof is classified, and we were limited by the fact that we have to build on top of the garage. So that put us at a point that we had to start with. And then from a height perspective, again, the garage really had a major impact on that because of where we were starting from. And when you look at, the building itself, the height variance really is 140. I look at it and say, well, we're 142 and a half. So that 2.5 feet ultimately, is really driven by the fact that we want to add better. We've got about a 20-foot ceiling height in the lobby area, again dictated by the garages that are there. So that height pushes us up naturally, and we could squeeze the units and bring this down significantly. It's about 7.5 foot clear is what the minimum code requirements are. We're at 9 foot clear in the units. We want to have better units for everybody and not just try and squeeze things just for the sake of it. So, I think when you look at all of that together, and most importantly, when you're thinking about height here, let's remember that the bulk of the extra height here is the elevator core, and that's sitting in the middle of the building. That nobody's going to see. Doesn't mean it's not valid. Doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. I'm not trying to minimize it, but from a public standpoint, that's not something that people are going to notice. It's not going to change shadow lines. It's not going to, change anything from that perspective. So With that, I'll turn it back to you guys if you have any specific questions.
Teresa, can I ask one question?
Yes, go ahead.
Jared, what's the pedestrian public right-of-way from the parking garage through Rothschild out to the commons? Are you inviting the public to
Yes.
pass through the building other than the home dairy grade path?
So there will be through the garage. If you're a public resident, you're parking in that garage, you'll be able to easily get down and through the elevator area in there. If you want to walk from Green Street to the Commons, you can walk through the garage, and then that will connect to a corridor which goes through the lobby of the building, and that is open to the public. That will be open to the public. So that'll be a nice cut through for everyone.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? Suzanne, Stephanie?
Thank you. And just to be clear, yeah, please, James, to you, when you described the program, the Green Street, what's the in there? At one point, I'd heard something about a coffee shop or I don't know, an art installation, or what is on the Green Street 17? You know, it's got an atrium style seative spot.
It is.
What's going?
James, are you on mute?
Steven's frozen, at least on my screen.
Yeah, Steven's been,
Yeah, on our side as
he's
well.
frozen in his conversation. So on Green Street and.
James, if it's possible, I think it makes sense for John to pull up the rendering here. Can we share a screen so we
That's
can
what
at
I was
least
gonna
look at
say
that
is,
while we describe it?
Yes, you can pull it up.
Okay.
John, do you have the site plan with our first floor plan?
Yes, I do. Well, I don't have your site plan, but
Do you have the stuff with the landscaping
Yeah.
along the street? Yes, okay.
so what we have on the first floor is a lobby cafe area, not only for the tenants, but I believe this is, accessible to the public as well to
Yep.
use. So in the rendering form, let me just get to it here. This is what it currently looks like. So we will have art installations within the building in the corridor, but it'll be translucent so you can see it. And that artwork can be changed throughout the year or whatever it needs to be. But also we have a cafe lounge with a 2-story space in here. Because we were bound by that 20-foot 6 floor height to connect to the adjacent parking, we have this 2-story mezzanine where people can overlook East Green Street.
Right.
Thank you.
So that height hurt us from a variance perspective, but the benefit or for the flip side to that is, we have it here. We might as well utilize it to the best of our advantage. So we want to come up with, some good, unique things, maybe help showcase local artists. We've done that in the past. So we've brought a lot of local flavor into every project that we've done.
You pull up the plan and show where that cut through from Green to the Commons would be?
So that cut through is right here. So when you drive in, you have a cut through. This will be an elevator lobby dressed up for the public, and you have about 10 feet clear corridor. So it's a wide corridor that allows you to access right through into the Commons.
How would it cut through the parking garage? Like from Green Street?
From Green Street, basically when you park in, you can walk through and you can access this door right here.
Or you could walk into the garage and go through.
So here I am. So if you were walking from Green Street to the Commons, you'd kind of just walk through like where the cars are on the first floor?
Correct. Or Jared, do you want to talk about the mezzanine at all?
Well, it's not yet. We can, but that's not necessarily pertinent from if
Right.
you're walking from Green Street to
Right,
the
that's true.
Commons. You're not going to go up to necessarily come back down.
Right.
But there is the ability to enter the main door, come in, go up to the mezzanine level, cross through, and then come
Right.
back down.
Right.
So if people don't want to do that, in the project next to us, the Asteria project, which you'll hear about later, has the accessibility going through the middle of their project next to Sinanopolis to the rear area where there'll be walkways as well. So
Okay, we'll see that in a moment then. I was just wondering if this was replacing that connection that we have now. Forgive me, I
No.
missed the September meeting, but thank you.
yeah, and it should be known, like if you look at this floor plan and it could be out, and I know it's been out at the planning board meeting at the first level in this space, Ithaca College is moving in. So on the existing Rothschild building where the bank was located, Ithaca College is bringing in their physician's assistant school on the first and second level. So there'll be a lot of additional life that's being brought to this building. And that's a public benefit as well. Without this project, it was one of the key things that Ithaca College looked at when trying to locate something in the Commons was the residential component, because a lot of their folks in their PA school are married. They want to be near where they're having their classes. It's, I believe, a 2-year program. So they would move in, be close to their school. And so there's that opportunity.
It's a funky site. So, we tried to do the best that we can, making the connection as easy as possible.
Any other questions? I have one when you all are finished.
We are.
So I don't know if we got the same, when you reference the agreement with the city, we got a document, whereas this. And this particular document says reconstruction, 2 decks of parking, 9 to 10 levels of rental housing. So this suggests that the city envisioned 9 or 10 levels. So for me, going from 12 stories to 14 is a big variance when this is such a recent zoning saying that they envision 12 stories. So I'm stuck on this. It seems that 9 stories of residential would have been envisioned as a goal. So this is where I need to hear specifically why it sounds like when you say the original agreement with the city, you went into it thinking that it would have to be 10. Is that to make your project work? And did the city think that it might be 9 because of the height of the floor variance, or?
So I don't want to comment about what the city may or may not have thought, but let me give a little background and color to that one.
Okay,
When we
thank you.
first started talking about this with the city, there was a separate concept, right? We were looking at potentially building a wider building that extended more towards the Commons over the existing Rothschild building. That is not the case anymore. The entire building has been pulled back and is only over the parking deck. So that would have changed, the overall dynamic. The reason we're not going further out is there's existing tenants there that we're not necessarily looking to displace. There's retail tenants on the first floor. There's a fabulous office law firm that has office space there that could have been built around, but would have probably been disruptive. And as James just referenced, there's now an agreement with Ithaca College for them to come and locate their new physician's assistant program in that building. So when you look at all of that and add all of that up, I like to think, let's try and do things that are, to a certain degree, the path of least resistance. It would have been a phenomenal project to build residential all the way out, but that would have taken, it would have been a much more expensive project, a much riskier project all around, and would have displaced more people. In the long run, do I think it may have been better? Yes, I do. But I do think the short-term pain there for the people involved may not have been worth it. So at that point is when we scaled back the project after the agreement with the city, when we looked at everything. And that's how we're at that point right now where the 10 stories really makes sense. If we got rid of 1 floor and went to 9 floors of residential, that takes off 10% of our units. The issue, however, is our construction costs don't go down by 10% and our operating expenses don't go down by 10%. So that disproportionately hurts the project. And it truly does make it go from a financeable project today to a non-financeable project without those units. I would love, if you'd like, we can definitely add more. that would be great on our side. But we thought we're not trying to ask for too much, right? We're trying to ask for just enough to make the project work. So we really would appreciate your consideration based upon all of that, in respect of the tenants that we tried not to displace and are not displacing there.
Okay, and as you know, our process is a balancing test, but we just need evidence for each piece that we want to balance. So that's
Understood.
why when I see in the city agreement 9 or 10 levels, I really want to drill down and focus on why you think you need the 10. So that's
Right.
very helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
Jared, I have one last question for you. You mentioned a term when you were talking about the affordable housing component. You mentioned the term workforce housing. I just want to clarify what, and I use a more accurate term, low-income housing that you're including in the project. So what did you mean when you said workforce housing?
So we there's sometimes those terms are definitely used interchangeably. There is we are working through with the city right now that there will be a minimum of 10% of the units as affordable. And when we look at the workforce housing, that to us has always meant where it's the agreement on this one is that it's going to be done at 80% of AMI is what qualifies for this. So
for what you're calling workforce, what percentage of AMI are you targeting for the low income?
So we're using that interchangeably. So whether it's workforce or that's all together in our discussions with the city and the IDA.
Okay, so you're just talking about more affordable housing at 80% of AMI. You're not like using LIHTC funds or anything like that.
We are not. It's all private funds.
Thank you. Are we finished hearing from this team?
Nels or Joanne, is there anything you wanted to add?
The only thing that I would like to add is that, we have been, for many years now, been trying to figure out how to finance reconstruction of the Green Garage. We knew that we would either have to put millions into it or close it. And so part of both with Asteri and with the Rimland project, we worked with both developers to so that they could finance that portion of the project. And it did, it is, those are very tall stories. And so that was their, I would say, handicap starting out with the projects, is that we needed to replace that public parking. And so this has been really something that we weren't sure we would be able to do when we started this, probably in 2015. So we've actually been working on this for a very long time. And so I would say, as a public benefit, that is for the city something really important to consider, that we're not going to lay out those capital funds for the garage.
Thank you. Is this the time when we want to see if Nels has a comment on this background? Nels?
Yes, yeah, I'd be happy to share a little bit. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
We have your document here, and I just need a little bit more. I need
Right. I won't read through it all, but I will just want to lay out a little bit of framework that the city's been working to try to add public value to the parking garage quandary we had, which we needed to replace or respond to the fact that the west and east sections of the parking garage needed to be reinvested in or decommissioned. The center section was rebuilt in 2008, where the Cinépolis is on the ground floor. So we know that the garage was facing a lot of structural problems, and we confirmed that in 2018 and 19. So the city's approach was to try to find out if we could add value to that project rather than just have a two-story parking garage. The foundations of the garage were not built to support more than 2 decks in those east and west sections, so they really need to look at a bigger investment. And the city set out through the Common Council and objectives for the program, which are described in the program, that include affordable housing, a conference center, street level active uses, and importantly, retention of Cinépolis, as well as retention of that pedestrian walkway to the commons. And I think between the Vicino and the Ithaca Properties project, we've accomplished most of those objectives. We didn't go into this expecting that there'd be area variances submitted. We didn't require that, but we did set out goals for the program. And it turns out that both the applicants are seeking some variances to make those happen. And there is a direct relationship between the requested program and these area variance requests, I believe. I think it's important to note that the rebuilding of the parking decks would be done by the developer and leased by the city. The city would pay a lease rate to amortize that cost, but at no profit to the developer. So that's really 2 stories of the project that are not going to return any economic benefit to the developer. There's no return on that. There's also projected not to be any loss on it. So it's just kind of a wash. But usually developers are seeking to get some profit from their investment. And then secondly, and very importantly, I think, is the below market rate housing at 80% area median income affordable levels. The agreement calls for a minimum of 10% of the units to be meeting that standard of below market rents, with a goal of 20%. And what we structured was that if the project is more profitable, they would have to increase the number of units, provided they can meet an objective of an 8% return, cash on cash return in the project. So that was the basic framework of agreement. So in some respects, if they get extra units, it doesn't really enrich the developer, because we will seek additional affordable housing units if, in fact, that rate of return increases above 8%. That's the framework for the agreement. I think that's important to keep in mind, because it really does limit the upside for the developer on this project. It actually could add additional housing that's beyond the 10%. We now know that the Industrial Development Agency has set its own policy of 20% affordable or payment in lieu, which we didn't know when we started this project, over a year ago. So I think we really have some unique circumstances with this property, and I think we have added a lot of value to what would be a 2-deck parking garage in its best case scenario if the city went at this project by itself. We really think there's some benefit to the community to have a public-private partnership approach to this. And that's some of the background. I'd be happy to answer any questions about the memo or more background we can go into if you have questions.
I have a question, but first I will ask for the other members. Stephanie, Suzanne, Stephen, anyone want to jump in?
Yeah, please. Now, a number of questions. Thanks for your memo and thanks for your comments. Couple quick ones. At what date will you evaluate the cash return, and then if it's above some threshold, renegotiate this low-income housing?
Prior to conveyance of the property. So they'll have to go through the Industrial Development Agency process, secure bank financing for the project. So the commitment is we look at that before we convey the property. It's a condition of the conveyance of the air rights, which is what the eastern section of the parking deck is.
And it's not for a number of years, it's in perpetuity.
No, I don't think we did talk about perpetuity. I think we talked about a long time. I think it was 30 years is my recollection of it. The IDA also has a limit of a time period on theirs.
Thank you. Who maintains the parking lot? Who cleans it? Who pays for that?
Under this proposal, the city would lease the property and take over essentially all functions and operations of the garage. The developer is financing it and constructing it, but the city would pay and control operations as well as maintenance. The city would also collect revenues on the parking garage.
And when the parking garage wears, investment will occur, and who's responsible for reinvestment?
Well, it's proposed as a 30-year lease. New construction of what's important is that it is new construction of a new parking deck. Normally, the new construction of concrete decks have a life of 50 to 75 years. The first years, you wouldn't expect too much reinvestment. The city in all likelihood will incorporate a reserve for replacement and costly repairs into its own budgeting process. But essentially the city would be responsible for it during, if they felt there was a need for any repair in the first 30 years. After 30 years, the city could opt not to continue with the lease, and the developers would take over ownership of that.
Thanks. And just two more. The memo you sent described that some of the land is being sold, if I understood correctly, for $1. Was it considered to give a lease, a 100-year lease or what have you? What?
I think I lost them.
Is it in the cities? Why is it in the? Am I cutting out?
Yeah, a
Yes,
little bit. I think I got the gist of the question though. Let me give it a try. For the Vecino project, the proposed sales price is $1 in recognition of the 180 to 220 affordable housing units that are going to be incorporated in the project, as well as the conference center, which are considered public goods in the project. The eastern section, the air rights, the sales price is set at in a raised value for those rights, minus the costs that the city was projected to incur to demolish and clear the decks without harming the ground floor private commercial space. So it was a fair market assessment value that determined the sales price combined with the engineer's estimate of what it would cost to demolish and clear away the existing decks that can't be reconstructed to support upper story development.
Thanks. And has the city, or in your own experience, can you benchmark this horse trading and this negotiation? How would you assess how the taxpayers, the city, the public are coming out? How do you feel about the outcome of this negotiation? And is there any analytic process to evaluate whether the city has got a good deal? Because it seems to me that there's a lot being awarded. And it's your memo, and it's not a criticism, but your memo combines the two projects in one. And it was a little bit hard to parse which benefits accrued to which development team. But my question remains, how would you evaluate and how should we think about the outcome of this negotiation?
Well, in terms of the eastern section, the sales price of the air rights is at fair market appraised value. So we're getting a fair return for that. The city is not required, under this scenario of this proposal, we're going to retain and rebuild public parking, which is sorely needed to support the downtown. 2 decks of public parking, as well as access to the stairways that lead down to the commons as another route to get, from Green Street over to the commons. I think that we're going to see a very, additional housing unit count is very important to the city in terms of our comprehensive plan. So 200 housing units is important, as including the 10 to 20% affordable, meets our primary goal for the city in terms of housing. The tax base will be enhanced by the project, and that's all in comparison to what the project would be if we didn't go forward with a project like this. The city would be faced with a question of reinvesting in 2 stories of parking deck, which will produce no revenue for the city in terms of, or no additional revenue, and would not be able to take advantage of the development air rights above, because the city does not control rights down to the ground to rebuild a building. We have the rights to restore the garages by themselves, but you need much more robust foundations to support upper story housing above that. So we really wouldn't have the ability without a public-private partnership to take advantage of the air rights downtown, right next to transit facilities and walkability, and a downtown that is seeking more shoppers and customers for their businesses to support both retail and restaurants downtown.
Thanks
So I
very
think all
much. But
told,
then-
it's a good benefit for the city.
I appreciate it, but just to be clear then, so the city has not gone through they didn't hire a consultant or didn't do some benchmarking to see how other comparable cities have come out when they have engaged in these types of public-private partnerships?
No, but we did put this project out for proposals and sought the best proposals we could find. We received, 4 responses to the request for proposals and selected those that we thought best met the goals of the city for redeveloping this site.
Thank you.
So I'm just gonna ask a quick one, then I'll see if Suzanne and Stephanie have questions, but just to follow up on that. When you selected this one, Nels, did you envision the 10 stories of residential on top of the decks?
When it was selected, they had brought forward a project that included, I believe, 10 stories.
Okay.
But it was not clear whether, we didn't know exactly, it was a concept at that point, not a detailed project.
Right, right, but presumably it would have been on top, it would have been at least one extra story if they put it on top of the parking decks. Okay,
Right.
I'm gonna ask you another question, but first, Suzanne, Stephanie, do you have questions?
I don't have any other questions, no.
Okay,
I had a quick one, but I'm not sure again if it's related to this project or not. There was a specific note Nell had about
have we lost Stephanie?
Stephanie, I think you went muted for in the middle of your question.
try that again. In Nell's memo, there was information that was included about the conference center. Is that a part of this project that we're talking about now, or
The next one.
the next one? Okay. Then I think I'm okay at the moment.
Okay, so I'm very interested in this. They'll make 10%, but if they make over 8% profit, they'll do 20%. Because that seems to me a game changer, because it sounds like you're saying the entire extra floor of housing gives you affordable units, basically, and it doesn't enhance their profit, because if they somehow, so 10% of the units will be affordable. You could say that's that 10th floor. But then if that allows them to make a big profit because they charge a lot of rent on the others, you would get more units. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is the framework the Ithaca Urban Renewal Agency is pursuing. Yes, if
Okay, so
they would retain it, as long as they retain an 8% return, cash on cash return, they would add
right, and if they,
incrementally add more units to
okay,
the
so
to the
if they only are
10%.
giving you 10%, it means they're not making more than 8%. And this is
Correct.
not a really lucrative, so they kind of needed that floor just to make, what they like. So if you're saying that when you chose them as the better proposal, they were proposing 10 stories, and if you're saying that giving them the extra stories is basically you're getting all affordable housing, that seems to me a much better argument to allow them to exceed a very recently enacted zoning. So that's kind of what I'm hearing from you.
A
Fair?
very, very strong goal was to try to maximize the amount of affordable housing in the entire project, as well as provide a mix of housing, so we don't have just one income category in the entire project, both the Vecino and the Ithaca properties.
Okay, and we
components.
don't have common council people here telling us that the 12 stories is near and dear to their heart. So no one seems to be, right, Megan? We don't have people, we haven't gotten pushback from the planning or common council, or is that a fair?
That's correct. There has been very little public comment. I don't know if we haven't had any previously at our hearing. I don't know if there's been any, if not much at all, at the planning board. The only comment we've gotten, like I said, was a letter from the Downtown Ithaca Alliance later today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Nels. It's very helpful.
I would like to hear what the Downtown Alliance had to say, and Teresa, I want to ask a question of you. It's possible you'll say as chair that you want to hold it till deliberations. My understanding is there's 3 variances. There's a setback, which is on the Green Street side, which, if I understand correctly, aligns the facade with the existing facade, and I'm supportive of it. Jared talked about the height variance, and we could discuss that later. The third one is this 14 stories rather than 12. At our last meeting, Teresa, you had emphasized that this was consequential. And I didn't understand that until you highlighted it. I was fixated on the height. but you, if I understood correctly, said the number of stories matters. And I think you were making some argument on the look and feel of the streetscape. And so I wanted to hear more about that, and maybe Joanne could comment if I've understood your comments from last month correctly.
Yes, I mean, I was just saying that it's a significant variance, whether it's the height or the number of stories, because it was very recently enacted and they felt that 12 stories, they could have just said, given a height, whatever stories you can squeeze in there, but they gave a height and a number of stories, so that had to have been, that character of the building had to have been important to them. But that's why I'm asking so many questions about the benefit of getting that last story. Do they need the story? Does anybody not like giving them the extra story? But Suzanne, you are an architect, so.
Well, I just wanted to point out that two things about that. One of those stories, and architects and developer are here, the way I understood it, is one of those stories is the roof deck. So it's really appearing like 13 and not 14, right? The difference between height and stories, and well, one difference between height and stories, height has to do with the overall mass and the bulk and the streetscape and all of that. But stories also has to do with density, you know, the number of units, rather than, you know, just having higher floor to floors across the maximum height. And I think, are we discussing now, or?
I think we're just, I mean, we don't have.
I
a
think we've
public hearing
moved
to
into the
close.
discussion portion.
Right, we don't have a public hearing to close, so. we
Oh,
can
okay,
go ahead and
okay.
Discuss.
I just wanted to make a comment about, back to what I just said about the extra floor adding people and units and, you know, to a building, rather than just having, we're talking about 13 stories instead of 12. But I wanted to make a comment about the reason I asked Jared about using the term workforce housing, which some people debate using that term or not. But what's important about it is when we see low-income housing, oftentimes it provides housing for people at, say, 60% of AMI or lower than that. And there's kind of this missing group that has incomes higher than that, but still has trouble affording market rate housing in Ithaca. So 80% of AMI, I mean, for me, I think that's important. Also, they're privately providing this as part of the development. So I think that's something really important to consider here. You know, this isn't subsidized. Yeah, as far as public benefit goes,
especially because they're not using the tax credits, and they're.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like there's any subsidy used here. So I think that
maybe for the IDA, you know, the tax abatement, or, I mean, they're probably going for those.
I mean, Joanne, please interrupt if I said something incorrect with all of that.
I just want to comment that my comment to Nels was if I understood the way the deal's financed, the willingness to reduce the purchase price for the air rights by the costs of demolition of the parking garage, for me, represents a significant subsidy.
You know, Stephen, unless I saw that it was 2-point-something million for the parking garage, less the demolition costs. I think then what I guess well, here's Nels to talk about whether it was that fair market value was for vacant land. That might have, perhaps Nels can illuminate us, sorry.
You want to go into that? The appraisal was based on a couple of assumptions for that fair market value, and it was basically the value of the air rights if it were developable. So that's where he got the 2.2 million, which assumed that there was a plinth to support it, you know, built up above the parking decks. So it's really looking at what's the value of the you know, the air rights above the reconstructed parking decks, assuming you could build down to the ground. So it had all these assumptions built into it. So one of the assumptions baked into that is an assumption that the existing parking decks would not be there. It would be removed. And our engineer for the city, Stantec, did an estimate of what it would cost to remove those parking decks and start over, essentially. without damaging the ground floor commercial uses. If we did it by ourselves without a public-private partnership, without partnering with Ithaca Properties. And the result was it was a $1.9 million cost to do that. Which even then we were concerned that would be viewed as a taking or a temporary taking while we did the construction activity, which wasn't factored into that value even. So I don't think it truly, our view wasn't that that was a subsidy. Our view was that that was an appropriate way to recognize the avoided costs the city would have incurred had the city had to undertake that demolition and clearance of the existing decks.
Thank you. Well, to Suzanne's point where the additional stories would be more density, then it makes a lot of sense that the parking garages don't have any apartments, so that the extra story is not maybe something that would be so out of line with the zoning, and maybe that's why everybody in the city, as far as we know, is on board with it. Fair statement?
I would say, yes, that's a fair statement. Certainly the common councilors that we've, been in conversation with, and the planning board is very much supportive of this project. I just wanted to speak just to something that Suzanne said, which was the floor to ceiling height. We encourage a minimum of 10 feet of floor to ceiling, and in some developments we require that. We've had, particularly in some of the affordable housing developments, we've seen where 7-foot ceilings I really don't contribute to quality of life within those units. And we've also seen some of the units are not at the same quality if they're the affordable unit as compared to the market rate. So we really encourage those high ceilings and the light and the air. So I just wanted to say that it is important from a planning perspective and from quality of life.
Thank you.
And Joanne, can you comment, do you already know which of the units are designated for low-income housing and how do you feel about the distribution and access to light or ventilation, noise, or who gets the plums and who gets the crumbs?
Well, I think I would have to refer to the architect for that. Because I don't, we've talked about distribution, but I don't know that number, and I don't know the locations.
We have currently not specified that in the drawings yet. We're still working through that, how we disperse them, but we disperse them equally throughout the building.
John, I just think it's important for you to highlight that there's really no inferior units here.
Right.
The units are, there's not, one floor that's worse. There's not one floor that's necessarily better. Obviously, the higher up you go, you get better views, but the units, it's typical throughout. We're not building a stack of affordable units on one side that are all 10% smaller and much worse units. We're building all the units effectively the same.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so maybe we should finish with taking testimony now and just deliberate. Are we ready to deliberate? Thoughts?
Teresa.
Suzanne? Yes?
I was just wondering, we do have a revised recommendation from the planning board as well that
Oh,
came in.
okay.
Can I
And
read
also,
that for you?
We should, Stephen wants to hear, maybe
Oh,
you
from
could
the-
just read us the Downtown
Absolutely.
Alliance. Both of those
If
things.
they say anything particularly damning or congratulatory, we may have to take it off the record, but maybe if it's just kind of mild, it'll be all right.
Okay. To the City of Ithaca Board of Zoning Appeals from Gary Ferguson, Executive Director of the Downtown Ithaca Alliance. I want to offer the support of the Downtown Ithaca Alliance to the applicants for zoning variance requested by the Jeff Rimland project at 215 East State Street in downtown Ithaca. The Downtown Ithaca Alliance is the formal governance management organization for the downtown district, which includes the Green Street parking garage site. The support of the proposed variances for height and number of floors is predicated on the following: the city comprehensive plan and the Downtown Ithaca Alliance 2020 strategic plan both call for densification of the core of downtown Ithaca to allow for larger buildings in closer proximity to each other. This project upholds and forwards this goal. The proposed changes are slight as noted below and will be within context of the immediate neighborhood. The Rimland project provides significant community benefit. It is being built on the eastern third of the Green Garage site and will rebuild the eastern third of the Publix Green Garage. The city has prioritized the rebuilding of the garage, and this is becoming accomplished through partnerships with Jeff Rimland as well as the Vecino Group. This partnership enables this critical piece of community infrastructure to be rebuilt without the city needing to take on expensive and difficult construction debt. If this project cannot move forward, the expense of rebuilding the eastern portion of the garage falls back onto the city and public sector. The Rimland project will also provide affordable housing in compliance and conformance with the Tompkins County IDA CTAP program guidelines. This new affordable housing will increase the stock available in the downtown district, again providing significant benefit to our community. The variances for height and 2 additional floors are driven by the economics of the project and the need to rebuild the parking on lower levels. The top floor is also the rooftop used for the building HVAC equipment. These requests appear consistent and reasonable with other nearby projects. Part of this overall project also accommodates the new Ithaca College Physician's Assistants Training Program and Clinic. This too represents a major community amenity both for downtown and the entire region. For these reasons, I offer our support for the approval of these variances, and please contact him if you have questions.
Thank you. Do you want to give us the planning board?
Yes, sorry, one more. Okay. So the board has revised their previous recommendation as follows. The planning board does not identify any negative long-term planning impacts and supports this appeal. The applicant seeks the additional building height to accommodate the parking decks, connect to the existing commercial building for pedestrian access, and provide a rooftop terrace for residential tenants. The board feels that in this particular case, the additional story benefits not only the applicant, but the city and its residents and visitors as well. The board reasoning is as follows. 1, the applicant is rebuilding 2 decks of public parking at the east end of the city-owned Green Street parking garage that is incorporated into the building on the lower levels. This section of the garage is in urgent need of replacement. By incorporating this urgent need into a larger development project, the supply of public parking is maintained without capital cost to the city and its taxpayers, as the city will lease back the parking at project completion. Excuse me. 2, additional housing in an appropriate location in the downtown core is of great value to the city and its residents. 3, the board has looked extensively at the massing and design of the building. They have found it to be well designed, consistent with the downtown design guidelines, and significant enhancement to Green Street. 4, due to the building's location tucked between the Marriott Hotel to the east and the future parking decks to the west and pushed far back from the commons, the additional height does not render any negative impacts to surrounding neighbors. The height of the building does not appear to be 14 stories, as only 13 are visible, and the tallest portion of the building, the elevator tower, is in the center of the building and not highly visible. In addition, the applicant proposes to construct the building at the rear property line on East Green Street, providing 0 feet of the 10-foot rear yard. Rear yard setbacks are established to preserve space, light, and air between properties. A rear yard setback is not needed in this case because 1, the building extends through the block, therefore there's no need to provide space, light, and air between 2 buildings. 2, because the residential entrance is on Green Street, it is more desirable to bring the building closer to the sidewalk to create a consistent street edge than to push it back 10 feet to provide the setback. And 3, both this project and the adjacent Asteria project will transform the north side of the Green Street from primarily a service area, parking garage behind the commons, to an active and vibrant area that will complement development on the south side of Green Street.
Thank you. Okay, so thoughts? Stephanie?
I feel like a lot of our questions from the last meeting have been addressed. I don't necessarily have any other additional concerns. but willing to hear what other people are thinking and have to say.
Okay, great. How about Suzanne?
I apologize for missing the September meeting, so I'm catching up a little bit, but,
Oh, should we have Stephen first and then you?
well, I could just tell you my thoughts.
Okay, thoughts.
I think much as the planning board just wrote, I think the 13-story, essentially 13 stories over the 12 allowed, given the unique characteristics of this project on top of the parking garage, I think that that's not such a negative departure from what's allowed. And I think the 142.6 feet versus the 140 is really minimal once you take into consideration where the actual parapet of the building would be and the elevator penthouse located. And so I don't see that as being such a huge departure from what's allowed. And at the same time, I said what I said earlier about the provision of the affordable housing between 10 up to 20%, given the profitability of the project that Nels is going to be watching like a hawk, I think is really important to, one, providing housing downtown, two, providing this lower than market rate housing that can help accommodate people who don't qualify for the low-income housing, for other low-income housing projects.
Okay, thank you. Stephen, your thoughts?
Well, I think what for me is very, very important is that we don't have any interested parties or members of Common Council or leaders of groups that have standing at BZA saying anything negative. And I think that we must really rely on the squeaky wheel to flag problems. I think to the extent that I am concerned about the variances, it would really go back to the city's capacity to negotiate from a position of strength, financial strength, and sophistication. And this is not, again, a critique of anyone in the city, that we do the best we can. The potholes outside my house speak loudly. So I don't think that any beefs I have are with the developers. I think to the extent that I feel that if I understand, and I'm not a finance person, I'm not a real estate person, I'm not a lawyer, that we have a situation, if I understand correctly, that the land that the parking lot sits on and the air rights are being sold to this developer, which seems like an enormous asset of tremendous value in the core of downtown, and that the city is negotiating from this kind of counterfactual of how the heck are we going to finance the redevelopment of the parking garage, and what are we going to do if we can't finance it and just close it down and let it crumble while we watch, leaves the city in a very poor negotiating position. So to the extent that I'm critical, it's about the kind of world we live in the city and not this development. And so with respect to the height, I think others have said it, that it's not significant because the 2.5 feet is nothing and the 12 feet is set back from the street and you never see it. The setback issue makes sense from a kind of design and flow perspective, and the number of stories we've talked about in some length, and I'm okay with it. Although I think, Teresa, you said it quite well last time, that the developers knew exactly what they were getting into when they bid on it, and they made their bid without the variance, and they must have done their calculations and their feasibility studies with the expectations of by right development. And it must have been favorable. And so to the extent that they come and ask for a little bit of extra, given the balance of the public benefits, I think it's fine.
Ethan, can I just, Stephen, you know, my whole reason for being here, or not here, but at Cornell, is to help planners understand how to negotiate with real estate developers. I would wish Niels would come back and explain. The way I understood this was, it wasn't as the city was saying, we're desperate, we need to do something. I heard him say fair market value for those air rights. So I presumably they had someone do an appraisal of it, and that was the price, Nels?
And also he said that the city doesn't own down to the ground. So the city could not rebuild the parking garage. Well, they could rebuild the parking garage, but they couldn't build housing above because they wouldn't be able to make a proper foundation since they don't control that part. So
So the developers have purchased this land from some other party.
Nels?
Now, the facts here are that the property is currently owned by Ithaca Properties. The land
Right.
is owned by Ithaca Properties. The city owns the air rights above for the 2 decks and above that. So the city does not own the ground at all. So that's an important consideration. I think.
Thank you for straightening me out. That is very important. I think that the air rights are, I can't imagine that 12 stories or 14 stories of air rights in the city center is only worth $2.5 million. I think I could have got in on that auction.
No, but didn't you get fair market value? Didn't you assess the fair market value for the air rights?
Yes, the appraisal was done by Midland Appraisal, one that the Tompkins County Assessment Office uses on a regular basis, as well as the city. So a fair market value is determined based on its development potential as air rights with those assumptions I discussed earlier.
And I'm sorry, Steve, I misspoke before, but I meant the air rights were valued at 2.2 million. So I didn't see this as a negotiation at a point of weakness of, I think it's fair, at least what we're hearing about the appraisal.
So for me, the important thing is that everybody in the city, because of the public benefits, is on board with having another story of housing. I think the rooftop deck, you could argue that that's not really, you have to count it as a story, but it's not going to appear as a story. It's not going to add any density because we don't want to be in the trap of now everybody in the thinks they can get 2 extra stories by just saying it's a better project, because then we've negated the zoning. But it seems that this is a unique case, and they gave all the reasons. They pushed it back from the commons. They have the extra tall parking. They're not really adding any density, and everybody in the city wants these affordable units. And if it turns out that they're feeding us a yarn and it's actually going to be very lucrative to have that extra story, well, if it is lucrative, then more units become affordable. So it's basically, I think the city negotiated very well in this project, but I'm not really, that's not so much a concern to me as balancing the benefits of giving the variance. So so I'm pretty happy with the evidence that came out tonight in making a case for the variances.
I agree.
Okay, so
I also
does one of you want to make a motion?
Oh, I was just going to say briefly that I also really appreciate the planning board's additional comments. I thought it was well summarized and captured again our discussion tonight.
Yeah, it's very helpful. If we could always have everybody, it would be easy for us.
I guess I would just say that that's why I started my comments by saying that we don't have anyone opposed. I find, I must admit that as a kind of conspiracy theory prone person, when the planning board and the common council align so closely with the development team, I tend to get nervous.
Yep, fair enough. So this is the point where I ask if one of you wants to make a motion.
Yeah, I'll be glad to do it.
Okay.
I have the sheet in front of me, thanks Megan, but I don't have the appeal number. And if I move it in my PDF, I will waste a lot of people's time.
Sure, it is appeal number 3164.
All right, so in the matter of appeal number 3164 for variances regarding height, rear yard setback, and number of stories. I move that we approve the request for a variance based on the following considerations. With respect to whether an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties, we have every indication that this is going to be a positive for the parking garage, for vibrancy of the commons, for the green street facade, and all of us who've lived here and recognize the existing use and look of the lower level parking, this is going to be an upgrade, both hyper locally and in the precinct. Whether the benefit sought by the applicant can be achieved by a feasible alternative to the variance. Well, I think the only one there, certainly not the setback, but the height and the number of stories kind of go together. And it's quite clear that they could have accepted their height and stories by right and not pursued this. But we've had a long conversation filled with lots of useful information that suggests that it's a reasonable request, that it makes the project doable, and to the extent that it adds to the profitability of the project, the public will benefit from this surplus. Whether the requested variance is substantial, one could suggest that the jump from 12 to 14, which is something like 12%, is substantial. But when we think about the height required to meet the parking deck floor compatibility, and we think about that the 14th story is a rooftop terrace and not really livable enclosed space, I think we can say that it's not outrageous. Whether it's substantial, I'll leave for someone else to argue. Would the variance have an adverse impact on the physical and environmental condition of the neighborhood? No, I think it's going to be quite positive. I do have some concerns about circulation for pedestrians and vehicles and deliveries, but I'm sure our planning department and the developers have thought this through, and that we're all going to adjust to this new density. And on balance, this is consistent with the strategic and comprehensive plans of the Downtown Business Council and Common Council in the city of Ithaca. And whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, as always, the applicants could have lived with their development rights by zoning. And so they're asking for some flexibility. And in the spirit of this deal, which is a public-private partnership, I think it's warranted. So on this basis, I move that we approve the requested variance on these three issues.
Thank you. Any amendments, comments, discussion? A second for the motion?
I'll second it.
Megan, real quick, is there a environmental review that we have to also sign off on, or?
The planning board completed the environmental review for this, and they adopted a negative determination of environmental significance on August 25th, 2020, which the resolution was in the packet for your reference.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so any further discussion? Okay, so Megan, would you poll the members?
Ms. Charles,
Yes.
Ms. DeShanes,
Yes.
Ms. Egan Ingalls,
Yes.
Mr. Wolf.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a unanimous agreement for these variances, and I'm supposed to tell you that you're going to get a written confirmation from the zoning board. Thank you very much. If they're
Well, we
still
thank
here.
you for your time and help on this.
Thank you very much. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time and effort on all this.
Yeah.
Thank
It's going to be an exciting project. Good luck.
We look
Thank you.
forward to have you all down there.
All right. So Megan, are we on to the next?
Yes, we are. Give me one moment just to admit
Okay.
the next group. Next appeal is appeal number 3162, 120 East Green Street. Appeal of the Vecino Group in partnership with property owner, the Ithaca Urban Renewal Agency, for area variances from section 325-8, column 9, height and feet, and column 14-15, rear yard requirements of the zoning ordinance. The applicant proposes to demolish the eastern third of the Green Street parking garage and construct a new mixed-use building on the same site at 120 East Green Street. The first 3 floors of the building will house a 49,000 square foot conference center, while floors 4 through 12 will provide 218 affordable housing units. The project will build upon the existing center section of the Green Street parking garage to provide a total of 350 spaces of structured parking. The existing parcel will be subdivided, and the Vecino Group will take ownership of an approximately 55,000 square foot parcel that includes the existing eastern and center sections of the garage. The proposed building will be constructed on this site. The city of Ithaca will retain ownership of the remainder of the site, including most of the land used for the city hall parking lot and the alleyway between the existing parking garage and adjacent buildings on the commons. The first 3 floors and a portion of the 4th floor will be constructed on the rear property line of the subdivided parcel, providing 0 of the required 10-foot rear yard. The applicant is requesting a variance from the rear yard requirement in order to accommodate the room sizes needed to support the conference center and to allow for the provision of a community room on the 4th floor. The remainder of the 4th floor and floors 5 through 12 will be set back 10 feet from the rear property line and will meet the requirement of the zoning ordinance. The applicant also proposes to exceed the maximum 140-foot building height allowed by the zoning ordinance. The southwest corner of the building will be 150 feet in height to allow for taller floor-to-floor ceiling heights in the proposed sky terrace on the 12th floor. The property is located in a CBD 140 use district in which the proposed uses are permitted. However, section 325-32 requires that an area variance be granted before a building permit is issued.
Thank you. Is the applicant here? We've not heard from them before, so we're going through the entire process, yes?
They presented at our August meeting an initial presentation and went over the project. And then they came, but it was not, we haven't started deliberations and such yet.
So but that didn't count as the public hearing.
That's correct.
That was,
Yep.
okay, so we're going from the beginning, we're 5-minute presentation to highlight your application and then a public hearing. So welcome.
Thank you all. My name's Kate Chesbrough here from Whittam Planning and Design. We're coordinating the entitlements for the project. And joining us tonight, we have Bruce Adab-Yazdi here from the Vecino Group. They're the developers and architects as well for the project. And Andy Sharabi here from the civil engineering side. So we've been following the conversation that you've all been part of tonight. A lot of the context that was provided in Nell's letter and that has been discussed so far is applicable to this project. The conference center that was discussed in Nell's letter, for example, is part of this project, but we do have the parking. We have an open to the sky outdoor pass through that connects to the Home Dairy Alley that's existing today between the Commons and Green Street. We also have the street level active uses, and we're just excited about this project generally. The overall status of the project, we have gotten our negative determination of environmental significance in September with the planning board. We're continuing to work with a number of parties on all of the issues that relate to this project, and that includes working with the city to coordinate outreach as it relates to access to the building, working with our neighbors at Herald Square and the City of Ithaca Planning Board on the north facade and other design elements of the project. If you've been following along, those have been pretty dynamic conversations. And we're working with others on a public art approach. So we're hoping, pending our conversation this evening, to receive our final approvals this month to allow the project team time to apply for their building permit, as well as their state Housing Authority funding for the affordable units that are, one of the main features of this project. So I'll hand it off to Bruce to go through some of the slides, and we're all here to answer any of your questions.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for your time and attention on this particular project, and I appreciate the preview we did back in August. It sort of helps some of the folks that were there for that, but I will run through the entire request here fairly quickly. I do want to recap, though, the economic development impact that we're going to have with this particular project, with both the residential completely 100% state tax credit affordable housing project, as well as the conference center project. And expansion of the center section of the garage at 350 more spaces. And I'm pretty proud of what we've done also with the walkway that's going to connect the Home Dairy Alley and Green Street. I think that was one of the things that when we negotiated and sort of talked about the project and were awarded the project way early on a couple of years ago, this was an important element to vitalize that walkway that Catherine mentioned. So with that, I'll just quickly share my screen and go through some of the elements of the request that we've made here. So can everybody see my screen where it says 10-foot rear yard setback?
Yes.
Great. So this is all in the packet. So I'm going to run through this, though, in a fairly quick fashion. Everybody knows what the west, center, and east section of the garage. I will make note that in the description that was read at the very beginning, it said something about us and the eastern section of the garage, but our control is over the western section of the garage. So I don't know where that text came from in the description, but it probably needs to be corrected. And so the project as a combined element on the whole block, you'll see our residential project on top of the conference center with the garage expansion. That's our controlled section of the project. Ithaca Properties is over to the right-hand side. And so you can start to see the total massing of the entire block happening here. And what we're proposing here in the overall site plan, this is two diagrams. The top one is the existing conditions. The bottom one is the proposed conditions. And this is exactly what has been presented in your package. Up here, the yellow represents city-owned, including the Cinemapolis area, the existing garage to be demolished. And you can see here that the existing garage currently encroaches completely into the 10-foot rear yard setback as it sits today. And so our proposal was to essentially take that same line and use it in order to maximize the amount of footprint that we needed in order to accommodate the conference center, ballroom, and meeting room spaces that were required as part of the program. You'll note on this little diagram here in your package, the blue dashed line is the approximate footprint of the residential tower above the fourth floor or the third floor. So then what you see here is that the residential tower is set back and not within that rear yard setback. So what we're asking for is for the first 3 floors of the project to be included in that. And so without a lot of detail here, I can go into sort of the first floor plan is the main meeting rooms with some space for DPW here on the north side with some access back to this east-west alley. You start to see here on the right-hand side some of the landscaping and pedestrian elements that we're creating in this plaza space between Cinemapolis and our project. And over in the southwest corner, you see the outdoor space here on the corner here that faces City Hall entrance and sort of activates the street down here. The main entrance to the conference center, front and center, right on Green Street, in a large pre-function space that would have all transparent glass along the street so you could see in and see the activity and see things that are going on. There is a section in the bottom left-hand corner down here in the very left, which is for a retail element that currently does not have a tenant yet, but that would be a small coffee shop or some sort of a retail element that would be able to take use of that patio on the ground level. So as we move upwards in the building, so you can get a feel for why we're needing to have this rear yard variance, you can see that the ballroom space is fairly significant and is necessary in size in order to meet the economic requirements of the conference center operations. Again, a very functional pre-function area, not too big, not too small, not just right. In the rear back here, you can see some back of house functions that start to show the encroachment in that rear yard setback on the north side of the building. So again, I'm sorry, so that was actually the first floor. Again, this is the second floor with the large ballroom. And the ballroom then seats 800 people for dining, roughly, for a nice large dinner. That was one of the functional program requirements. It's got a large commercial kitchen on the west side, and then a sort of a rear entry walkway area that services all the different ballrooms if they are all separated as separate rooms, and provides rear access to service the main ballroom. And then as we go up on the next floor, the third level, which is still part of the conference center, the third level is a mezzanine space, a mezzanine level that wraps around the height of the ballroom. The ballroom and the meeting rooms are very tall. So this is really administrative offices and some storage functions for the conference center. And then once we get up to the fourth level, it starts the residential portion of the project. And you can see here at the very top up here, you can start to see this area right in here where we've stepped back the facade of the residential building outside the 10-foot rear yard setback. So we're complying with it, except for this little area here, which is part of our community room space. So this is still part of that within the rear yard setback. And then as you go all the way up on the upper floors, the complete tower is outside the rear yard setback. So this would be a typical tower plan. I won't go through a lot of details. There are some technical drawings here that talk about the overall sections within the spaces and what we're achieving with those. I think the key element here is to show that we are stepping back after that third floor of the conference center to provide more air and light. And then there's a center section here that's fairly wide that opens up, that allows the Herald Square project to have a lot of space between their units and in our project. There was some discussion at the previous board meeting about activating of that alley space. We had a couple of images here, and some of the thinking here still exists. We are working with the local arts community to start thinking about what this space should be and what sort of artists and what sort of art could be displayed in this space, and how we would go about doing that with them. But we see this as another, east-west connection and pedestrian from the back entrances to some of the facilities on the commons, as well as City Hall and the rest of downtown. So then, so that's sort of the rear yard setback request. The height variance request is fairly straightforward in that we are 12 stories. We're not asking for an additional story. But one of the things that we are asking for, get down to the right drawing here, is that there's a portion of our project on the southwest corner on the 12th floor that we're calling the Sky Terrace. And that's one of the balcony spaces and one of the amenity spaces for the residential project. It's up on the 12th floor. It serves as a community room on the 12th floor. We also have a community room on the 4th floor as part of the project. But we really wanted to get the, and so the fact that we had to stack our project on top of fairly tall meeting room spaces pushes all of our floors up. And in this case, you can see here, we're roughly to the roof of that Sky Terrace, we're 148 feet 5 inches. And we want the ceiling of this room to have some more height to it and some more mass and scale to some of that space. And so we're requesting the height variance basically for that portion of the building, not the entire building. The rest of the building footprint on that 12th floor gets us to the 140-foot maximum highest walking surface on the roof. The parapet does get us a little bit taller than that. So the parapet itself is 241 feet, 141 feet 6 inches. But again, the rest of that roof area meets the 140-foot requirement. So that, in a quick nutshell, is the request that we're asking for, is the rear yard setback and the height variance for the Sky Terrace portion of the project. Glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Board members, questions?
I do have another drawing here that might be beneficial for everybody, and it just sort of shows, again, the step back of the residential portion of that project. And then you can start to see here the community rooms start to come out of that middle section, and then you can see the U-shaped section of the building. There's a larger portion that's wider and more open in the middle section of the building.
So Teresa, can I ask a question?
Yep, go for it.
Bruce, thank you for your presentation. If I suggested with respect to the setback, stepping back after you get up a couple of stories makes a lot of sense, because then you give the residences light and you don't give them claustrophobia by having them hugging Herald Square. That makes all the sense in the world. But of course, from my perspective, the ground level is actually what matters the most, because that's where the pedestrian traffic is and that's where people might feel squeezed. So my reaction would be the step back isn't really the issue. So how would you respond to that? And can you make an argument? I mean, I understood and I found it powerful, the fact that if I understood correctly, the existing parking garage encroaches on the setback at the same line where you propose to build your new building.
Correct.
That's a nice argument, but I don't find the step back to be particularly compelling, because it creates a private benefit to the residents and to the developer, and the public insult is at ground level. So how would you respond to that? And secondly, if you went back to the graphic you had up that showed the Asteri, I'll call it a flying wedge above the sky deck. Isn't that triangle much higher than 140 feet? And how should we think about that height to accommodate that piece of the building, the triangle, the wedge?
So there is a provision within the zoning code and the zoning text for mechanical screen walls to be a maximum of 18 feet tall. So the west end of that, this end of it, is at the maximum height of 18 feet, and then it goes down from there. It is a perforated metal panel, so it will have some transparency to it. And so what we're trying to do is again, do something that gives an attractive sort of top to the building in some ways, visually and massing wise, but still stay within the zoning guidelines of 18-foot maximum mechanical screen walls.
So maybe it's directed to Megan or Joanne. The total height of this building is 158 feet, if I understand correctly. How does that line up with the zoning of 140 feet? And the 140 feet, imagine the 18 additional feet for mechanicals?
The mechanical screening does not count to the overall building height per the zoning code, provided that it's a certain proportion of the footprint of the building. So, and that meets that requirement. So that is taller, you're right, but there is a provision in the ordinance that mechanical screening isn't counted as part of the overall height.
So by right, they are entitled to 140 plus 18?
Correct.
And what are they asking for in the real world total height?
They are asking, I believe it was 10 extra feet. Let me just double confirm.
Correct, 150
for
feet.
that one section.
For this area.
Right.
So then it will be 168 feet will be the total height.
No, because, sorry, go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, we're just asking for the 10 extra feet for this component, this Sky Terrace area. The rest of the building should comply within the zoning guidelines as per right.
So Stephen, the 18 feet is not on top. So it's about 8 feet more. So in other words, the mechanicals wedge thing is not on top of that.
Ah, that's important. Yeah, very good.
Yeah,
all right.
It's behind that. That's correct.
Thank you.
Well, and is it true that, so the corner part that we're talking about that you've highlighted here, if you just made the ceilings in there very low and squeezed it down to be like the rest of that top floor, it would comply. Is that correct?
It would comply, yes.
Okay, so you just want to make a more, a higher ceiling and a better space just at that corner that you've highlighted on the screen. And
That's
that's what we're
correct.
talking about here.
That's the request.
Good. Bruce, please go back to my first question about the alleyway and the how, if I push back on your step back idea as a kind of mitigating strategy, what would you say to me?
If you want to push back on the on the 10-foot rear yard setback, I would say that, and we kind of talked about this at the last meeting, because there was a fairly significant presentation that went through the economic viability of the conference center if we had to reduce it by 10 feet on both levels. So that's number one. Number two, we've gone to a fairly extensive effort right now to work with the arts community to start thinking about what sort of materials and palettes and patterns and artwork could happen at the ground level in that space. This taller area, the conference center itself, these metal panels that are up high are really in some ways not as perceivable, because when you start looking at that space, I mean, what you really see is what you're walking down at that ground level. And what we're proposing at the ground level is a series of artwork and murals and maybe some installations of art along the walls that give people something to look at as they're walking by. They're lit from above with a little bit of light from the little soffit that's created right here between the niches of the brick. And as you can see, we've actually picked some lighter colors than we're previously showing. The metal panel colors are now a little bit lighter, and we picked a lighter brick as the background for that. And so I would say that I think we're trying to do a really good job in coordinating not only with the city and Herald Square, but with the arts community to make this a great space.
And just as far as the site design goes, we're integrating the paving with the paving scheme that the paving pattern that Herald Square has proposed. So this will feel like a cohesive space, and it will relate to the space that the project team has, more full control design over between the Asteria building and Cinemapolis and the parking garage. So from a pedestrian perspective, this will be a dynamic, open to the sky, pretty comfortable space to be in. And we're still working on the details on that, but we feel like it will be a very pleasant place.
And Steve, I will respond to your comment when we have the discussion. Your question about the step back at the third floor and the importance of that, but I'll save that for our discussion.
I think it's important. I think it's important too. I mean, we are providing some other benefits in addition to what we just talked about. And this is a view in the bottom left corner. If you're coming out of the Home Dairy Alley headed to Green Street, you'll now have a sort of open to the sky space here that does provide daylight, and there's some plantings that are going to be happening along on some vines and some cable structures that happen in front of the garage. And so I think, when you look at this project and then from Green Street looking back towards that, again, instead of walking under, this really cold, dark concrete thing, we're going to have you can still walk under cover if you want in inclement weather over in front of the Cinemapolis, but you can also walk straight through open to the sky in nice weather.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I have a question. So I think it's important to understand, for me to understand, that it's essentially the same footprint as the garage is now, correct? If we're talking about the setback. Okay. And then, but the other thing is, so are there residential units on those lower floors in Herald Square that are facing your blank wall of the conference center?
There are not. Those first couple of levels are commercial spaces. And we've talked with them and had a couple of meetings with them. And as a result of some of those conversations, we have gone from this darker metal panel colors to lighter colors, just to bounce some more light in and around that space. Yeah, so they have got commercial space that looks out onto that.
And then once those units start, that's where your setback is, or at least their units start above that piece?
Correct, that's correct. Yeah, as a matter of fact, if I go back to the meeting packet, you can sort of see that in the building sections that I had pulled up. Let me see.
Can I ask how tall the garage is now? Because the garage is at the the footprint of your conference center area. And is that garage as tall as the conference center part will be?
The existing garage is probably not as tall as the conference center. I
Is
don't
it-
have that, I don't have that relational information right here at my fingertips, though.
The
Megan,
existing garage is 45 feet, 3 inches.
Okay. So that's pretty significant. So that right now blocks that footprint from the Herald Square
It does.
about as much as it will. Is that true?
So, yeah,
Similar.
so our level 4 where it starts is 45 feet, 4 inches.
Okay, so, I mean, the parking garage is a little bit more open feeling maybe than a wall, but
Yeah,
this could be part of the thinking in Herald Square, having the residences above that, because they wanted to build to their line and it ended up being quite close to the existing garage. Okay,
Correct.
so that gives me context. Thank you.
Teresa, I don't want to get us pulled off topic, but when you started your sentence with how tall is, I was sure you were going to ask how tall is the letter A in Asteri? And we're
No.
not here to have a discussion of signage, but Bruce, how large do you imagine that word Asteri being?
I can't imagine it, but I can tell you, based on what I have here, I can do a quick calibration and tell you how big that sign is being shown right now real quick. If I can quickly calibrate this to.
Well, he's looking at that. Megan, have they done their sign application yet? Do we even care? I mean, is it ever going to come to us the way
It
it's?
could. I have to look at that more. That's an excellent question.
So I encourage you to look at it very carefully.
And as Bruce is pulling this up, the final design for the signage is still being worked out, but this Asteri brand at the top of the building has been there since the beginning.
Right, but if it's a certain size, then we don't care. If it's bigger, we do care. So,
Right, and if it is
Those
needing,
roughly 5 letters.
right. But we are not applying for a signage variance right now. I think that's.
right, I think Steven's just telling you that he's giving you a little anticipatory advice.
If we need one, we'll sure come back for one, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, but he seems to be saying, don't ask for bigger than you need. Not on the table right now, Stephen.
Well,
Thank
they're
you.
5-foot letters, but there's also a gigantic A on the other side too. Is that what Stephen was talking about?
Well, I just think it's about, we've had this conversation several times with recent projects, and I think it's really important that the planning review pay close attention. Signage in the city is out of control.
Yeah, it's about, I mean, that A on that side's about 16 feet tall.
Mm.
And I will tell you that, again, the reality is once you start looking at these from.
Oh, I see the giant A.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, well, just Megan, perhaps I'll email you separately or common council or the planning board, because I think it's super important that we pay attention. This branding in the sky has to be contested at every turn.
Yeah, I can see that. I hadn't looked at the signage yet. And I know they're still working on it, but if it is as proposed, it will require a sign variance. So we could talk about that further. So
That A can turn into like the Citgo sign of Boston. You can see it from
And
everywhere.
then get a historic designation. Sure.
I can tell you that the planning board looks very seriously at these huge signs in the sky. And we are not an airport. We are a downtown. So they will look at that. And
Thank you.
We did get a negative declaration or a negative non-adverse impact from SHPO on this. We've submitted it and gone through all the discussions and they give us a non-adverse impact letter.
Good. I mean, that's not on the table right now. I was asking how tall the garage was, Stephen, because it currently is in that, creates that alley with Herald Square. And I was
Correct.
wondering if it was similar to the part that will be sticking out in the new building. So that's, and it seems that it is pretty comparable, not exactly the same.
Teresa, I think that's really important because Herald Square presumably designed around existing condition, and this is changing that condition. And if they had residential units back there, that would be a point of concern, but they don't.
Right.
I can tell you, we have had significant conversations with them, and they are on board with what we've proposed.
Right, well, we'll find out in 2 minutes because they're either here or they're not here. And we don't have anything written from them, so that's a
Okay.
good sign. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Any more questions? Okay, so then I think we're ready for a public hearing, and Megan's going to tell us if we have anybody to hear from.
All right, so we have two written comments. One of them came in from the same person in 2 parts. Would you like me to go ahead and read them?
Yes, please.
Okay. So this is the first.
Hold on, just to be clear, those letters from Autumn Leaves Bookstore were distributed in advance, and I trust that the board has read them. I'm not convinced we need to read them verbatim.
Okay, so then we'll just include them in the record.
He did request that they be read into the record, and given our Zoom meeting protocols, if someone does request it be read into the record, we need to do so. So
Okay, great.
Yep. So I would like the following comments read at the public hearing. I'm very concerned about how this project is going to affect my easement, of which the applicant is not a party. C 518 deeds, page 280, dated April 19th, 1974. Here are some specific elements. The easement specifies that the unobstructed path, which is 14 feet wide along the rear of the buildings. There is no language that states that this is at the ground level only. Under what rights can the ZBA allow several floors to overhang into the easement, even at a 2 or 3rd floor level? This is not a zoning question. This is an issue of neighboring property rights. The plans are directly at variance with the easement. It shall be used in common with others and shall remain open and unobstructed at all times, emphasis added, except when in actual use by the grantee. The placement of bollards is shown in a drawing on this of the site are in contradiction with this language. Again, the applicant is not party to the easement and has no rights to block it even temporarily. In addition, I don't understand how someone can build a building that lines up with the edge of the easement and not block the easement area for a significant period of time during construction. If the wall is along the easement, the footer will have to encroach on the easement. This property owner is not a party to the easement and therefore has no property rights to block it at all, let alone for months or possibly years during construction. The easement also states it is, quote, it is understood and agreed that the area abutting parcel 2 above described on the south being under the parking facility overhang shall be owned and maintained by the city of Ithaca, emphasis added, for the use of the general public, end quote. How can the city transfer those obligations of maintenance to a private party without a signed agreement from the other easement holders? Again, this is a property rights issue, not a zoning issue. At no point has the applicant come to me or, to my knowledge, any other easement holder and discussed our acceptance of encroachments into our easement. The owner of the Herald Square project obtained a signed agreement that allowed them to block the easement for a limited time in exchange for valuable improvements to the area behind my building. Thanks, Joseph Wetmore. And his second comment, I would like this correspondence to be included in my comments at the public hearing. The maps Vecino provided show distances between the buildings of less than 14 feet. I'm not sure exactly what is being measured, as Vecino's drawings are not really clear. Apparently Vecino has more detailed drawings, but chose not to include them in the notice they gave us. Since Vecino is asking to be allowed to build up to the property line, Vecino's footers are going to have to go under the easement area, requiring the digging up of an area that is supposed to remain unobstructed. It is impossible for Vecino to build up to the property line and not block our easement. Further, it appears that the northwestern corner of Vecino's building overhangs part of the easement. Vecino says the bollards are open for discussion, yet there has been no discussion about them. In fact, they were not in the documents sent out with the zoning variance request. I got them only after a previous inquiry I made to the city that was answered by Vecino. I told Vecino team members well over a year ago that would be a mistake to try to work out a written agreement with the neighbors at the last minute. Since there are many people involved in this agreement, it takes time, especially in the era of COVID-19, to get everyone to agree on a single written document. Yet here we are at the last minute again, and Vecino still hasn't started this process. Remember, Vecino is not a party to this easement. Vecino is a neighbor asking a neighboring property owner to give up some of their property rights for an unspecified period of time. I have repeatedly asked Vecino to start the process of a written agreement, and they keep kicking the can down the road. Vecino knew over a year ago that they needed to start the process of a written agreement and chose to wait to the last minute. And they made this decision knowing that Herald Square made the same mistake, and that the working out of a written agreement put the Herald Square project months behind. Vecino should not be allowed to gather up all the permits and then use them to try to bully the neighbors into quickly agreeing to give up our property rights without enough time to fully discuss what we are agreeing to. The city cannot extinguish our property rights without using the eminent domain procedure. If granted, this variant cannot be construed as the city giving Vecino permission to override neighboring property rights. The proper approach would be for Vecino to get agreements from the neighboring properties before going to the city and ask for a permit. Currently, Vecino is asking the city to give them a variance so they can do construction at a minimum building footers on property Vecino does not own and has not even started the process of getting permission to use. If the city issues Vecino the requested permit, it must include a requirement that a written agreement from the easement owners be completed as a prerequisite of the variance being effective. Joseph Wetmore, 115 East State Street. And we then received a new comment that came in later today. To all whom it may concern, I have a question of how the Vecino Asteri project plans to maintain and uphold the easement rights to our building. This concern is certainly for the construction phase and also extends beyond. We will be greatly affected by this project as it sits directly at our back door. We have a project that has long been underway, and the remainder of the work to finish our project is work that needs to be done on the rear of the building. The Vecino people have not approached us with any sort of construction details or negotiation of the construction phasing of their project. We have always stood with the fact that our easement holds legal rights to be able to access the rear of our building and Home Dairy Alley unobstructed, thereby being able to complete the work we need to do. There's been no communication from Vecino to us at all regarding the easement or any attempts to mitigate the construction impact. With the project happening so close to the rear of our building, I am sure that there is a legal necessary precautionary fall zone fencing required. Also, the Vecino project takes away all the once public loading and delivery zone that served the whole central corridor of the commons and claims it for their own private loading dock without remediation to all involved. Although the Green Street garage footprint currently sits up to the proposed adjusted lot line, the ground floor always was public access for vehicles as a service corridor for staging the needs to the rear of these buildings in the entire central corridor of the commons. So this only makes the easement issue more pressing, as it will be the only remaining access for equipment, materials, and supplies to make it to the back of our building and other businesses who have relied on the easement. In the past, we rarely needed to use the easement for vehicles, respecting that it was also a pedestrian passageway. The city always held an accommodating loading delivery space under the garage that was workable for us to stage our deliveries. But with the sheer volume of traffic to host both Herald Square and the Asteri apartments, along with all the traffic generated from the conference center, we will be forced to use the easement frequently and as our only means to access the rear of our building and stage deliveries. Therefore, it cannot be constrained. The Herald Square project has had the rear closed off for multiple years during construction, but they did extensive communication to ensure that we would maintain access for our construction needs throughout the entirety of their project. They showed regard for the easement in place. Vecino has done no such thing as of yet. Thank you for your consideration, Jonathan Jedd and Robert Massey of the Yellow Deli in Ithaca.
Thank you. I don't think I've seen that last one.
No, it came in later, right before the meeting.
Okay.
So are there any other speakers to come on?
I'm assuming there's no one in favor because we would have heard them first. So Megan's giving us written ones in opposition. Anyone waiting to speak in opposition?
No, we have no one in person here to speak in either support or opposition.
I
I'm
would
not sure that, just to be clear, and again, perhaps I don't, I'm not sure any of those letters actually said they're opposed. What they said is that communications have sucked.
Well, I'm going to count them as an opposition so that the applicant has a 3-minute rebuttal that we'll hear.
Okay, but just to be clear, I think that they're using this opportunity to try to leverage a little communication, and so I think that's great, as opposed
Yeah,
to coming
well,
on
and
record as
also-
saying that they want us to
I
strike
don't
down.
even
the
understand the
request.
easement, and I don't know if it impacts our process. We'll ask about that afterwards, but I just want to give the applicants a chance to respond since they were critical of the application,
I
whether
would-
it's communication thing
Yeah.
or what. So
I
please,
I will try to make my answer to those questions succinct. I did respond directly to Mr. Wetmore via email after he sent those. So my responses were not included with his readings, but that's okay. I did meet with Mr. Wetmore as well as the Yellow Deli a year ago or so to introduce myself, to say, hey, here's where we're going. The reason we have not introduced the common area shared agreement issues, I have on the screen here. I'm just going to flash this up here. There is a draft document put together that basically says the whereas parts of that easement exist, and whereas we're going to start construction at some point in time, and whereas we're going to work with the with the other building owners and tenants in these ways and communicate in these ways. They would all be then signing on to this document as signatories. We have that drafted and working with Joanne and the planning department to coordinate a meeting and discussion. It is a complicated issue. I have on the screen here, the easement that they're talking about is this dashed line that extends from Green Street back to the rear area of the Commons buildings. And so it's 16 feet wide in the north-south direction. It's 12 feet wide in the east-west direction, and it is a legal easement. You can see here that the proposed construction of our project does not overhang into the easement. It does, the property that we're being transferred to us does encroach into that easement in this little triangle, and we intend on having that triangle shared back into an easement off of our property, so we're not reducing the size of it. And we've accommodated our loading dock in such a way that we can back a truck up to our back door and not encroach within that easement. With the planning department's help and assistance, we are going to have a meeting with those property owners that are adjacent to talk about what is the best use of this remaining space for loading and unloading. It is going to end up still being city property, and what we've said all along in our project is we don't know what the best use of this piece of land is going to be just yet. We do need to get input from all the stakeholders, and Joanne and the planning department are helping us basically put together that sort of a collaborative discussion to see what really needs to happen with this space, this remaining yellow space that will still belong to the city.
thank you.
It's probably worth clarifying that there's no portion of the building in the northwest corner will encroach on that gray area. The dashed line outside represents the second floor of the building. So there won't be any overhead obstructions for that area.
Andy, since you raised it, the letter from Autumn Leaves, which I think did have some implications for the BZA because they were suggesting that there's a set of legal and property rights issues that are separate from zoning or separate from a variance for zoning. The claim was that the foundation will, you just mentioned no overhanging infringement. What about underground?
Yeah, we are requesting a 1.5 foot permanent footer easement for the footings for the building to encroach into that easement, but those will be like pile caps that'll be 4 or 5 feet below ground. So there won't be any at grade obstructions that would limit any access to the rear of the buildings. As Bruce mentioned, there's no physical canopies. We don't have any eaves or overhangs from the building. I will note that Herald Square has a canopy that's coming out over their main doors. It does project into the alleyway, probably about 6 or 7 feet. But our project proper is not proposing any above grade encroachments.
And so then the understanding is that if Bruce's meeting facilitated by Joanne is successful in negotiating infringement of the easement during the construction period, and there's some friendly agreement about how the loading area will be accessed and used, then this issue should disappear.
Yes.
And I would just add that when we did the Herald Square building and construction, we had a similar issue to maintain that access to the rear of those buildings. And as Bruce said, it is complicated, but we were able to successfully negotiate an agreement between Herald Square and the property owners for that easement. So we are using that as a template, if you will, for the similar agreement with Asteri and the property owners. So we
Thank
are
you.
working on that.
I would also state, I mean, I think that we have a full commitment to get that sort of agreement in place from our team. And we are willing to stipulate, at least with the city building department, that we would have an agreement in place prior to the picking up of a building permit.
That's
So,
correct.
we plan on still, and we really didn't want to have these conversations until we were confident that A, we would get through our secret process, and B, we would get through this process and our building wouldn't change significantly as a result of this. And we really want to get through those two sessions. And then I think we could really have a better understanding of what our potential mitigations are going to be.
Well, and that's what I also think, that our process is a separate one. So whether or not we grant the variance, it doesn't automatically become a building permit if there are other.
Correct.
No.
Correct.
So we do our thing separately, and we just consider the variances that are in front of us, and then it's up to others to take care of easement issues, I think. Megan, is that your understanding of the process?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, but Teresa, just in the past, that in the BZA, we have considered kind of spillovers associated with granting variances and what the implications are for the BZA enabling projects to move forward. And so, you know, I think that we've agreed that we don't have a very clear legal understanding of the scope of our purview, but just in terms of intellectual honesty, we have considered the kind of domino effect of when we grant a variance, projects can go forward.
Yes.
If spillovers.
Yes, but I think in this case, so if we're the last step standing between a project and a building permit, then it goes forward, and then it can have knock-on effects in all sorts of ways. But I think the easement is a completely separate issue. So we could grant them 50 variances, but the building department isn't going to give them permission to dig up the easement unless they have an agreement.
You know, I agree with you. I do think, I mean, I'm concerned about how much truck traffic is going to be in the city hall parking lot. I think that commercial kitchen, 800 diners, what a number. Who
Well,
knows where these people are going to sleep?
That would be, you know, probably once or twice a year scenario. That's not like an everyday event.
Yeah, well, this leads me, and I think we'll talk about this in deliberations, and I have questions about where these growth projections or where the minimum viable size of the project and what the consultant's biases were. I think that the whole growth machine logic has to be looked at very carefully. I'm not convinced that 800-person conference center is consistent with my vision of Ithaca. I have questions about that. I would also ask Bruce, the second floor with the main ballroom, it looked like you had really maximized the footprint to accommodate a large ballroom. That if I'd asked you, why don't you squeeze the commercial kitchen, or why don't you squeeze that alleyway on the north side, or why don't you squeeze the Green Street side to allow you, so how would you respond to that?
I would respond to that by going back to, there was some detail that I think we presented at the last meeting that we didn't have, in a 5-minute presentation you can't get into, but there was a very significant effort to get a ballroom that is of a certain size that fits a market segment that's needed and is missing right now in the area. So in the market, if you reduce this ballroom by 10 feet, then it's got significant competition in other areas. If it's this size, then it fits a spot that's currently vacant in the region.
Yeah, and again, I think this, I'll bring this up in deliberations. I'm not convinced that I want my Ithaca to compete in that market.
Well, that's not your question to answer. I don't know, is it?
Well, it is when you're asking that you say you need to meet a minimum size to meet your goals for accommodating crowds that allow you to meet your commercial and market segment. I'll raise this when we go into deliberations.
Again, we, as a developer, we are simply executing the plan and the proposal that was offered out by the city 2 years ago.
And I can say it's undergone an intense amount of analysis, and perhaps we should have brought you into this conversation prior to this variance request, but this is, and I think Nels could probably speak to it. We've had market analysis, we've had consultants look at this, and this is the minimum size for the conference center.
I didn't understand what Bruce said is quite important, that this was not your vision, this is the city's vision.
That's correct.
Yeah, that
Absolutely.
raises fundamental questions about what's going on.
And while I have you here, Joanne, and maybe Nels, it was helpful for me. Nels said something about the lot line adjustment. So I think part of it is if the city had conveyed the property as the city held it, they wouldn't have been in the rear yard setback. They wouldn't have been asking for this variance at all. But the lot line adjustment, my understanding is the city wants to take over and maintain that as a public amenity. Is that correct? Is that the reasoning behind? Because you made a lot line adjustment, you didn't convey the whole parcel. You
That's right.
changed the edge of where the parcel was. True, false?
Yes.
Someone knows the answer to this.
Yes, that's
Okay, so
correct. That's correct.
so to me, this was a game-changing piece of information. So could you give us a little bit of that context?
Nels, do you want to take that, or do you want me to take that?
Why don't you start and I'll add to your
Well,
comments.
so it's important for us, for one, to maintain access because the property owners do have a legal right. So by doing the lot line adjustment, we've given them the property that they need to build their project, but we have maintained ownership and control over the other part of that property.
And that's going forward as both an easement for loading, but also they're trying to make a nice public walk through.
Correct.
That's correct.
And did you envision when you did that the new project would perhaps build up to where the old footprint was of the garage in order to get the conference center? Was that you were in support of this variance because you I guess what I'm trying to get at is it's a strong evidence to me that that's where the garage stood. And part of it was you took away what would have been their setback and you're maintaining it as a public benefit. So it's less of an ask for the building to go up to where the old footprint was. Is that sort of how the city saw this case?
Yes, that's correct. Our expectation was that the footprint of the project would extend, would follow the parking garage footprint or be close to it on its side. And you're absolutely right that the city wanted to maintain that area. It actually has a legal, somewhat of a legal designation as a public way.
Right.
And that allows more openings on the buildings that are close to to that public way. So it needs to maintain a public ownership to have that treatment, that you can have more windows facing that area if it's a public way. Therefore, we need to maintain ownership of it rather than sell it for the part of the development parcel. And that benefits all the buildings on either side of that public way.
I would add to that the initial proposals that were sent in by Vecino back in the very first part of the RFQ process showed using that full footprint. In order to get the size of the conference center and ballroom where it needed to be, it was necessary in order to do that.
Thank you. Any more questions, Stephen?
No, thank you.
Okay, so I think we're ready to close the public hearing and have our discussion. Suzanne, how are you? What are you thinking?
I'm sorry, can I interrupt with one more thing?
Yes.
The planning board recommendation, it is quite lengthy, but
Oh, thank
I'd
you.
like to
Can you
read it
read
for your
that?
reference. Yep. The planning board does not identify any negative long-term planning impacts and supports this appeal. The board has considered all the information provided by the applicant and balanced the following priorities: the need for housing, particularly affordable housing, a community conference center of a particular size to be located in the downtown core, the need for adequate space, light, and air between buildings for the comfort of building residents, as well as downtown visitors and workers, the need for a vibrant, safe, and interesting pedestrian zone. The following information is in the FEAF Full Environmental Assessment Form Part 3 and explains the board's reasoning and process for supporting the massing and design of the building, including the required variances. The design of the Asteria project was recently changed to address lead agency feedback regarding the limited space between the Asteria project and a recently constructed building located to the north, Herald Square. Herald Square received a rear yard variance and was built close to its southern property line. Likewise, the Asteria project requested relief from the 10-yard rear yard setback in order to accommodate the space requirements for the community conference center and maximize the number of affordable housing units. Complete relief from the rear yard setback would allow the Asteria project to be built 12 feet from Herald Square for the full height. However, although the first 3 floors containing the community conference center were designed to be approximately 14 feet from Herald Square, the residential tower is U-shaped, providing light and air between the buildings. The original design had a slight step back such that there was 19 feet between Herald Square and the closest walls of the new building. Nevertheless, the lead agency asked the applicant to explore a design that would provide more space between the 2 buildings. Based on input during the public hearing and lead agency discussion, the applicant presented a revised design at a July 16, 2020 special meeting. The new design retains the encroachment in the rear yard for floors 1 through 4, but steps back floors 5 through 12 an additional 10 feet to be well within compliance with the rear yard setback. The applicant stated that the step back was implemented on the 5th floor rather than the 4th floor, the first of the residential tower, due to structural requirements pertaining to the size of the conference center ballroom. The revised design is shown in drawings and visualizations contained in the presentation that was shown at the special planning board meeting and in application materials dated 7/23/20. The lead agency has reviewed these section and plan drawings that demonstrate the approximate 14-foot gap between floors 1 through 4 and the approximate 24-foot gap between levels 5 through 12 of the new building in Herald Square. The lead agency also reviewed drawings and visualizations showing how the applicant proposes to create more interest on the north facade of levels 2 and 3 facing Herald Square in a more welcoming and dynamic pedestrian zone between the 2 buildings. The pedestrian zone improvements include inset niches between building columns, installation or relocation of public art, lighting, and varied building materials. These design changes allow for increased light and air between the buildings and enhance the pedestrian experience between these 2 buildings. At the July 16th special meeting, the lead agency also considered a presentation by representatives of the Community Conference Center Working Group, as well as the Ithaca Conference Center Market and Feasibility Study prepared by Hunden Associates and dated April 2017, updated in 2019, referred to as a feasibility study, to estimate the number and type and attendance of events. This information allowed the lead agency to understand the relationship between the size of the ballroom required for a feasible facility and the size and footprint of the new building. The lead agency has determined that the Asteri project as a whole has many positive aesthetic benefits. Both the Asteri project and the adjacent project will transform the north side of Green Street from primarily a service area, parking garage behind the commons to an active, vibrant area that will complement development on the south side of Green Street. While there are scenic resources noted in the environmental assessment form approximately 2 miles from the site, the new building is not expected to be out of scale or character with surrounding structures in the city. The new building will include the Asteri logo, which has been designed to fit in with the overall aesthetic of the new building. The lead agency has determined that the above listed priorities have been balanced and any potentially minor negative impact to aesthetic resources have been mitigated to the maximum extent practicable by redesigning the new building and activating the pedestrian zone. Accordingly, no significant adverse impact to aesthetic resources is anticipated.
Is that it? The end?
That's it.
Thank you. That was a long one. Thank you. Thoughts for discussion?
But since Bruce has this graphic up, Bruce, could you bring that back up? That ballroom, what happens to the ballroom size, square feet, and number of people you can accommodate without the 10-foot waiver of the setback?
The ballroom goal was roughly around 13,000 square feet. We've not been able to achieve exactly 13,000 square feet. We're more like a little about close to 12,000 square feet. So we've already sort of minimized the goal in order to accommodate what we have now. This red line represents that roughly 12,000 square foot line. You can see that this chart shows how diminishing you get, how many kinds of events you can have and how many events you can have depending on the size of the ballroom. This is just a national average of different kinds of things. There's also local studies of the local regional ballrooms. This was sort of how between this and what I've got here is the presentation that was made to.
But hold on, Bruce, let me just go back to that graphic. So if I understand, if you drop to 10,000 square feet for your ballroom, you could accommodate 73% of the imagined events. And if you bump it up to 12,000, you can capture 74% of imagined events.
Well, 10,000 would, I don't know if it's 73 or I don't know exactly what the number is, but it gets closer to between 70, you can see here, 75 to 80% all the way over to this side of the line. So you capture, additional kinds of events with that additional square footage. And if we reduce it,
I do think that information is actually very relevant. Teresa's always the one who likes evidence. I'm not so hung up on evidence. That's why I like Teresa's leadership.
Courts like evidence.
Yeah, that's why I like you. So my point is, I think this is very relevant information that Bruce is showing on the screen right now.
But if you take away that 10 feet, would it put you down to 10,000 or would it put you lower?
It's about 98 or 9,900 square feet when we take 10 feet.
Okay, so it would put you slightly below that 10,000.
The other thing, the other thing it does is it reduces the amount of space that we have available for other city-sponsored portions of the project, such as functional space for the DPW work area, where for equipment and staff and things like that. So we've got an area on the first floor that would have to be reduced by 10 feet, and that's the DPW workspace.
Oh, so I'm not sure that I noticed that. So the city has a direct benefit in accessing some of the first floor space.
Yeah, I mean, we did a whole analysis of the first floor as it's designed currently. And then if we reduced it on option 1, we would narrow the junior ballroom by 5 feet and the DPW by 5 feet. Option 2 would be leaving the DPW in space and losing 10 feet out of the ballroom. And so we went through and did a series of analyses for comparison, and one way or the other.
Is the DPW, is that for plowing the streets? What sort of?
It's all the equipment that's used to maintain the commons.
Maintaining the commons.
Mm-hmm.
I see.
Yeah,
okay.
they've got tractors and they've got snow brushes and then shovels and salt pallets and all kinds of equipment in order to maintain the commons area.
And right now that's in the garage, in one of the garages?
Correct.
Okay,
And
so
so,
then
and so
that's
we're
an additional public amenity that you could get in this particular footprint.
correct.
Okay.
We've been
Thank you.
meeting with them regularly as part of the garage meetings, but we've been meeting with city DPW staff for months.
Yeah, you can sort of see the green shaded area here is the DPW space. The blue area is a conference center. The unshaded area over here on the right is the residential lobby on the first floor. And then this purple space down here is the retail space.
Coffee shop something. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, back to our discussion. Thoughts from Stephanie or Suzanne?
The point I wanted to make a while ago, when Stephen asked the question about the step back at the, what is that, the third floor? And how
Fourth
important
floor.
that was, did it matter? I think there is a difference, I would argue, Stephen, between buildings that step back and a building that doesn't. I understand, you know, at the first floor, there's this constrained feeling, or however you put it, an insult to your space on the ground level. But I think, you know, there is, for example, if you compare, say, buildings that were built with the early New York City zoning code, where the buildings stepped back, and the idea was to allow greater light at the ground floor. If you compare a street like that, like Park Avenue south of or you know, any of the older the 30s and 40s buildings in Midtown that they step back like a wedding cake, versus say LaSalle in Chicago, where you have buildings that are built to the lot line and straight up, there really is a substantial difference in the amount of light that gets down to the street and the overall, and now it's a subjective thing, but the overall feeling of how you feel in that space. I think there is quite a bit of a difference. So I think stepping it back, but then stepping it back is also very important for the residential units at Herald Square and the residential units in this building. But both of them, you know, they need light, and well, they're getting light and ventilation, you know, by having windows, but also just the actual having light enter into those spaces, I think is important for that building to be stepped back a little bit. So I guess I'm pushing back at saying that that step back at the fourth floor and above doesn't really matter that much for the ground floor, because I think it does.
Okay. Response?
No. I think that if we try to simplify this, I think that the height variance is not substantial. That it's this one corner, it's a small piece of the building, it's for a very specific purpose. I don't see that as a big ask. Someone might say the building's, you know, too big and it's going to blot out the sky, but you know, an extra 10 feet on that one corner is not going to change that. I think this issue of the rear line setback, and if I understand correctly, Megan, when you read the planning board, you said 10 yards. I think it's a 10-foot.
Correct.
Yeah, and I think that's
It's
important.
definitely possible.
The 10 feet. I think the relevant facts as I see it. One, the existing parking garage is already encroaching. Two, Harold Square got favorable treatment in that they were allowed to build close to the lot line. The primary access is the Home Dairy Alley and not the east-west route of travel. Having said all those nice things, I think it's a substantial ask. I forget what would it was, 24 going down to 14? I'm guessing.
10 going down to 0.
No, the width of the alley with the full setback and the width of the alley with the proposed.
Correct. Yeah, it's actually 12, and then another 10 feet would be 22.
So if we grant the variance, it's 12, and if the variance, it's 22.
Correct.
So that's a ginormous variance request. So, you know, there's the balance. It's never going to be a spectacular welcoming spot. I must say, due to my own ideology and my own sensibilities, I think the city and the whole mentality of convention center is thoroughly misguided. I think it's growth for growth's sake. I think it's the kind of growth which is not contributing to community character. I think it's misguided. I think it's bad planning. It's bad business. That isn't perhaps directly relevant to the conversation, but I will say it on the record. I don't like that approach. I don't think it's what the city needs. And I think it's pushing for something that the residents of Ithaca don't want. And this is a professional value held by people who are in the development, not the development business, but in the economic development business. And I think that their sense of what their job is and what their worth is leads them to think this is their job description and this is they're doing the public's interest. I don't think they're acting out of malice. I think that I think we have difference of opinion about where the public interest lies. So I think this is a form of growth and development which does not contribute positively to the city. I think when we ask the questions of the area variance about how will this project affect the character of the neighborhood, I think it's deeply, deeply significant. Now, the question of how does the variance affect it, that's at the margin. So that's why I was interested in the histogram Bruce put up about what happens if they build the convention center of 9,900 square feet, 10,000 square feet, and they attract 70% of the business versus building one at close to 12,000 or 13,000 square feet and attracting 80% of the business. I'm not at all convinced that the city wants or needs or will benefit from that. It's more than we can swallow, and I don't think it's in the public's interest.
Thank you.
Stephen, you were cutting out. Did you, or at least I didn't hear it. Did you say that the easement isn't, or I mean, I'm sorry, the setback, the variance here wasn't in the public interest, or the ballroom?
I
The very
apologize.
last
I
part of what you
moved my
said.
computer to sit right next to the router. That's why, if I'm cutting out, my kids at school and my Zoom lifestyle is going to be really encumbered because I am a Wi-Fi slave.
No, you're okay.
I just
now.
need like the last 10 seconds of
Just
what you
one
said.
word,
You said,
So what I was saying
isn't in
is-
the public interest.
Right. I think that, and it's a question for Teresa, that whether we're asking, is the variance significant or is the project significant? And that's why I think that we have to think about this increment by granting the variance. I said my piece about the project and about a convention center and why would the city of Ithaca want an 800-person dining facility and convention center downtown? And is that in keeping with the character of the neighborhood and that with the public's vision of the future and how we want to use our land and use our resources, and how this will tax infrastructure and the vibe. But the question of the variance, an extra 10%, where we jump from a 9,000 square foot ballroom, which captures 10% of additional events, and it's particularly the largest events that we would lose if we didn't have such a large ballroom. And I'm saying my piece, which is let those 10% of events go to Rochester, go to Syracuse, go to, I don't know where they want to go. I don't think they're in my interest or in the city's interest.
Can I just intercede for 1 minute? Because that ship has sailed. The Common Council and has deliberated this. There have been many, many conversations about whether this is right for the city or not. So I can say that the Convention and Visitors Bureau has been in on those conversations. The Downtown Ithaca Alliance, the environmental assessment's been done on all of this. And I think that argument would have to be taken up with Common Council because they voted to finance this, to bring it forward. and to include it in the RFP that went out that Asteri responded to. So
would-
you might want to separate those two. I'm not sure about the,
Yeah.
I certainly understand what you're saying, and many people feel that way. But Common Council had heard all that, those arguments were made, and they endorsed this project at the size.
And
Thanks,
so
Gwen.
We,
from our
But,
point of view,
What is relevant is the criteria for evaluating variance request and the assessment of to whether the project or the variance is consistent with the character of the neighborhood was really my point.
yes, but I think
Okay.
also in this case, when we're balancing benefits and the opposite of benefits, detriments, we have to count achieving a conference center as a benefit because it was in the RFP and the city has supported it at every step. So if we personally don't think we should have a conference center, I think for the purpose of, is the variance, does it provide benefits that can't be achieved otherwise, we have to consider it as a benefit. We can't substitute our own, this is how I think.
yeah,
We can't
No,
substitute our own personal view that conference centers are bad. I don't know.
No,
I
no,
was gonna
Teresa,
just
thank
say
you.
I recommend that you focus on the variance requests. It's not our place as this board to set the policy. We just need to reevaluate it in light of what the zoning requirements is. Conference center isn't allowed use in this district. So we really just need to look at whether we do feel that 10 feet would have, how that relates to the factors that we have to evaluate each.
Well, again, I'll just make clear that with respect to the big picture issue, the reason that the Common Council and the Planning Board and the Mayor's Office and the Economic Development personnel would be in favor is understood very well through reference to theory and growth machines. My technical position that I'm arguing is with respect to factor one, whether an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood and a detriment to nearby properties. Everything I've said is highly relevant.
Yes, okay, so this is interesting because Megan can attest to this. For about 2 months, I've been pestering them to find out why Herald Square had a full bank of windows on the back when they were building right up to the property line, because my understanding was you can't have all those windows on the property line. And the answer when it finally came was, if you face onto a public way, you can have a full wall of windows. And this is part of the reason why they then made the lot line adjustment to maintain it as a public way. So it is conceived, is there a minimum width for public way, Megan?
I don't know that there's a minimum width, but to kind of just add to your point, Teresa, how that is the measurement normally of the percentage of window openings you're allowed is typically taken from your exterior wall to the lot line. But if you, about a public way, it's taken from your exterior wall to the center line of the public way. So the smaller that public way is, the fewer openings that you are permitted to have.
I see, so the city carved out.
10 feet is the magic number. And if you got to be more than 10 feet for both buildings to have those kinds of windows.
I see, so the city carved out a public way, they maintained it with a lot line adjustment so that both sides could have full windows, even at the property line for both of them, if both of them
Correct.
got the rear yard variance.
Correct.
So what the planning board has done is gone above and beyond by saying you have to set back further above this fourth floor or whatever.
Mhm.
And then where they have offices and commercial spaces in Herald Square, for that part, you can get your variance, but you will still be maintaining a distance that by code, they could have full windows on those offices. It's just not as much light and air. So for me, this was an important point because it would have been one thing if Herald Square got their thing and then the city, changed it to make them lose the benefit of their windows. But it seems like the city maintained this area. So I look at the variance of the rear yard setback as being not as significant as it would have been otherwise, because by taking over that strip of land and maintaining it as a public way, they are actually minimizing the impact of that variance. And I'm also looking at, I'm just accepting that there is a public benefit of this size of meeting space, because I don't feel like I can override that judgment, but I don't know.
Teresa, let me ask you on that. So this idea, I mean, you and I and others have talked about this idea of a balancing test. And when we think about the benefits and the costs or the detriments of a project, but when we look at the 5 factors, and I were to say to you, an 800 person dining venue in that space, would that be an undesirable change, producing the character of the neighborhood or detriment to nearby properties? It seems to me to be an overwhelming jump.
But Stephen, I mean, the way I see this, forgive me, I'm the newest here, is we're talking about
jump
whether
right
it's what?
Jump right in.
Whether it's an undesirable change, that 10 feet at the, I mean, I'm in my mind restricting it to an undesirable change between what exists now and what will exist with the alley back there. Not, I mean, you know, Megan makes the point that site is zoned to have a conference center. We're in a unique position that because of that 10 feet, we could shut this whole conference center down, unfortunately, because, or for whatever, you know, we could, if we don't allow that 10 feet, they can't do the 800, then it's not worth doing it. And da, 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 da.
I don't accept that.
What do you mean?
They could have a conference center with a 9,000 foot ballroom, which would give them access to a different set of renters and tenants, and their occupancy rate might go down. But that's not, you know, we're not.
Okay, point taken. We're not going to shut the whole thing down, okay? But we have the ability to restrict the occupancy of that room through this decision here. And that perhaps it affects the viability of building this at all. That's what I was taking a few steps down the road there. But I think we have to go back though, that this is allowed by zoning here. So I think we have, I mean, I see this as we have to determine whether the negative change is happening in that alley, not the negative change of the whole. I guess this is just a philosophical approach.
Also, my understanding is that if they had to shrink it, you wouldn't make the conference center because Hotel Ithaca has that size, and then it might turn into a daycare center or something many months down the road after they sort of went home sadly and redrew it. So I think I see Suzanne's point in that we're looking at not so much a bigger ballroom as a building that, in order to be most viable for their commercial use, would go up to the property line, similar to what the neighbor did on the other side. So
I can tell you that the planning board had these very same conversations, and part of their discussion also revolved around, well, who got there first? Is it fair for the person that gets there first to be able to get their variance and then have to force the other one not to? In other words, in this case, Herald Square or other buildings in the area are getting very similar variances. And I know you're not supposed to use those as a variance, as a precedent in these sort of scenarios, but the reality exists that he who gets there first maybe is the one that gets the worm. And I'm just not sure that's a fair assessment either.
okay, thank you. I think we should, just to follow our legal procedure, restrict it to our discussion now. I appreciate very much your willingness to comment. I would like to hear from Stephanie.
I was just thinking about, we talked at the previous meeting about the development of the alleyway. I don't know if we really talked about that or if we wanted to revisit anything. I'm just thinking about all the components of this, right? Development of Home Dairy Alley. Did anybody have any questions or concerns about that?
What's your feeling?
Oh, I think that the information that I remember was fine. I just wanted to make sure that we're looking at anything, that holistically. I know there's been a big discussion about other components, so I just wanted to revisit in case there's anything else that people wanted to talk about.
I don't think there's a variance request on that side, Stephanie, of the home dairy side, if that's what you're wanting.
Okay.
So we have two variances here, correct, Megan?
Height and
Got-
setback.
We've
Yes.
got that little bit of height and we've got this significant setback. So we should probably just only discuss those.
Can I
Um,
just finish quickly what I wanted to say before?
Yes.
Is that we are in this unique spot of, because they need the 10 feet to make the under 800, seat work, all that we could that we could throw a wrench into the whole convention center part of this.
Suzanne,
And-
every applicant takes that position.
Yeah, no. Let me finish. I just want to say one more thing, is that I think in order to do that, if we were to do that, I think that we are usurping a lot of other decisions that have been made by common council, by others moving this forward. Just my thoughts on that.
Yes, but if our task was to mirror those bodies, we would have no reason to exist. That our mandate is different.
I'm just gonna, again, just think that you should think about this in terms of the variance itself with the allowed use. Think about the comprehensive plan that we've been discussing and sent out to, and just because I do think it is important to focus on the variance issue, again, not the policy making.
And I guess
Not
just
the
to
policy
clear,
making. I think my comments triggered that. It's not the policy making. I think we should stick to the 5 criteria. I think that the one area that our BZA has always had a little bit of confusion, and we've been able to kind of finesse it, is that whether we are evaluating the implications of the variance, which is the marginal kind of expansion of the project, or the whole project as a whole.
Right,
And
what
we've
the
never-
variance unlocks.
Say it again, Teresa?
What the variance unlocks.
Yeah.
So often
So-
it unlocks other things that aren't really. So, but in reference to the comprehensive plan, are you saying that envisions a conference center downtown? That's part of the comprehensive
It
plan?
must have, if the zoning incorporated it, it must have.
I don't know, again, with the broader plan for phase 1, we don't think it specifically called out the conference center, but it has been a big part of the downtown plan that is still underway. And as Joanne mentioned, Common Council has specifically discussed the desire to have a conference center on this site. What the comprehensive plan does talk about is mixed use, additional density in this area, which is why it is the tallest zone in the city. And as part of that is places of assembly, which the zone particularly calls out as allowed use here.
And is that unique in the city? Like, is this plan envisioning that if we did have a conference center, it would be in the downtown or in this area, or not?
I think the goal has always been to have the conference center in the downtown, yes. Near transportation connections, there's multiple bus routes, there's multiple hotels in this area within walking distance to help support the conference center. So it has been identified as the place for the conference center, not only for the city, but for the county as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
For the county, I see. All right. I'm wondering if it's time to ask for a motion. I don't have a good sense of,
Before we move to a motion, Teresa, I think, do I understand correctly that no one has come out as an interested party and expressed concerns about this? Except for the easement?
Not to us. Those were the only comments that we received.
Yeah, and again, I think that's telling. It's possible that the meetings and deliberations that Joanne referenced kind of wore out the critics. But I think that is telling, the fact that no one is here tonight telling us that this is going to overrun, we're going to have Legionnaire's disease. No one said that. That's a Philadelphia joke, people.
you know what that is?
I'm glad somebody got it.
I think also it's worth mentioning that 100% affordable housing might have kept some people at bay who might have, because those are many customers of restaurants and businesses. So maybe that's a factor. It's such a big benefit to the businesses that maybe they're less concerned about negative aspects of the conference center.
Right.
I don't know, but we don't have a way to guess why people aren't here.
No, I'm just pointing out that they're not here, that people aren't concerned apparently about what this means for their properties or their lifestyles. So I admit, I personally think it's too big. I think that the variance is unnecessary. I think that it's just growth for growth's sake, and to max it out and to chase some imagined market segment that is the icing on the cake. I think the stakes are relatively low because this alley is just an alley. And even if the full 22 feet, I might get it wrong again, 24 feet had been retained, it's still just an alley. Maybe it's a wider alley, maybe it's an alley with more sun, but it's still just an alley. So as I've said before, I'm not at all concerned about the height. And I think that the setback is not so demanding. I think that the upside of the setback is not particularly attractive and public spirited, as I understand the public's interest. But I think the downside of the infringement on the setback is not devastating.
Okay. Are we ready for a motion? Suzanne, would you want to make a motion?
I would prefer not to right now. I'm listening, but I'm dealing with a child's bedtime right now. I'm here, I'm present, but I'd prefer that. Stephanie, can you make the motion?
Sure, I can give it a shot. Just trying to pull up the sheet here. Megan, would you be so kind and let me know the
Absolutely. Appeal number 3162.
in regards to appeal number 3162, through our findings today, through much deliberation, I feel that the variance requests are should proceed forward. Whether an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood or detriment to nearby properties, I think through the discussion of reviewing the footprints for the previous garage and redevelopment of the garage, the offset of the residential tower, I think that that helps improve our findings. Those are some things that I think will be in support of this. And again, that overall, reviewing the comprehensive plan, that there are many pieces that are in support of this, and there isn't a undesirable change for its location. Whether the benefit was sought by the applicant can be achieved by feasible alternative to the variance. Again, yes, probably at some length we've talked about this, but again, reviewing the previous conditions of both the previous garage, other neighboring properties, it seems like this can proceed forward, even though that there was another route for them to take to not come for a variance. Whether the requested variance is substantial, again, through our findings with the rear yard, maintaining the amount of feet based on the garage and then offsetting that to allow air and light in, I think that that helps ease the substantialness of this. In regards to the height variance, again, based on the discussion of just that little extra portion, and I believe that in the statements it said less than 5% or about 5% of the total footprint was being added just to accommodate that special location. Again, not substantial. Would the variance have an adverse impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood? No, again, based on the discussions of densification, the comprehensive plan, improving the garage, that all of those things are actually working for the benefit of the public and for the location to make improvements. Where the alleged difficulty was self-created, again, yes, in some regards, otherwise there wouldn't be a request for the variance. But again, due to the previous conditions of the property, that it would be matching and move forward with all the benefits. Therefore, I would like the board to consider moving forward with granting these variances.
Okay, thank you. I would like to offer a friendly amendment in factor number 2, whether the benefit sought by the applicant can be achieved by a feasible alternative to the variance. I think that we have heard strong evidence that the benefit sought could not be achieved without the variance, because the benefit they seek is to produce a meeting room of a certain size in order to access a certain market. And this is the minimum variance that they need in order to get that benefit. And they've not sought to bring it up to the residential area simply to increase their number of units and their profits. They've sought it specifically to get this particular size of meeting space. And in fact, this is a benefit that the city strongly wants for the city. So not only could the applicant not achieve the benefit without the variance, but they did it specifically in response to a request by the city. So I think that this is important evidence we have for this factor. And I would just like to offer that, Stephanie, as an amendment, if it's okay with you.
Yes, thanks for revisiting that, Teresa. Thank you.
Could I, question of clarification, the parking in the central section, which is part of this project, is that public parking? Thank you.
Yes, Stephen, it is public parking.
All right, so do we have further discussion? Oh, do we have a second for the motion? Sorry.
I'll second the motion, but I just wanted to make sure, is part of the benefit going along with this project, Stephanie, that you put in there, the affordable housing that would be part of this project that could be in jeopardy if this variance isn't granted?
We could have another friendly amendment.
Yes, you can add that. Sorry, there's so many components for this.
Maybe under, let's see, an adverse impact. Well, no, it's more like under number 1, an undesirable change produced in the character of the neighborhood. So that you could offer an amendment about a desirable change in the neighborhood. Do you want to offer that amendment, Suzanne?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Wait, I'm finding it here. Potentially desirable change in the neighborhood would be potentially how did I say it before? Sorry. A desire, by not granting the variance, a potentially desirable change in the neighborhood, which is the inclusion of a significant amount of low-income housing, may be put in jeopardy. Does that make
Okay.
sense the way I put it?
I'm not sure that that kind of crystal
Okay.
balling is part of the formula.
Okay.
All right. So if Stephanie accepts your amendment, it goes into it. Stephanie.
I mean, I might be in agreement with Steve on.
Okay,
on-
so we won't do that. We won't add that in. All right.
Fine.
Is there further discussion? So we have a motion and a second.
I would just say this, that I think that factor 4 for me is a very strong yes, that this variance is going to have a adverse impact on the physical and environmental condition in the neighborhood. The other factors, I think, are mitigating. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to vote on this as the motion as it was made. I'm either going to abstain or vote against it. But I just want to be clear that it's really factor 4 where I'm focusing my attention. I think.
And you're saying the physical because it makes a narrow space, or environmental because of increased traffic?
I think that the loading area, the truck traffic, the amount of people trying to get in that small space is going to create a crush. And I think it's more than it can be accommodated for. And I think that the variance, which boosts it some, I don't know what it was, 10, 20%, is going to have a negative adverse impact on the physical and environmental conditions in the neighborhood, in my view. And that's in
The
the
variance because it gives less loading space, or because it increases the potential for more customers?
the scale of the scale of the venue and the ambitions for the type of events they want to hold, I think are going to exceed the carrying capacity of the region and the footprint of the building. And we're going to see 18-wheelers backed up on Green Street on a regular basis, I predict. And I think the other factors are easy for me to swallow, that I don't think the variance is all that substantial when we analyze it piece by piece. I don't think it's self-created because they're executing the city's plan. I will accept the view that was expressed by others that this is not an undesirable change because it's been expressed by a democratic process of our elected leaders. But with respect to this one issue of will this variance have an adverse impact, it's undeniably true that as I understand what constitutes the physical and environmental conditions, this is a loser. So I'm just trying to clarify how my thought process.
Okay. Any more discussion?
Do we know if there was any studies that were done or any other additional information to help?
Yes, I think they had a lengthy environmental review because this was sort of a high stakes. Joanne, do you want to weigh in on that?
We did. We had a very, and all of those issues that Stephen brought up were studied. We're still in the process of doing that as far as the best way to get trucks in and out. I can tell you right now that very rarely do I ever see a truck in that back alley. And I've been in my office that looks on that alley for 25 years. The cars, the owners of the property will bring their cars in there to unload things for their store or whatever. I can also tell you that there were two economic studies done for the economic benefit of this conference center to the community and to the downtown. The spin-off effect from allowing that number of people to be brought into the center of our city is huge. And we are also anticipating many venues that we've not been able to host, although over the years we have had many requests. We simply cannot host a conference center of any size, a conference of any size. They are dispersed throughout campus, and the hotels, none of them have venues large enough. We don't have a venue large enough for major weddings. And all of that has been studied, and I am happy to send those studies on, although it doesn't speak directly to this variance, which is what you should be focusing on. But the economic boon to the community has been studied and shown to be significant.
Does that give you what you were asking for, Stephanie?
I'm comfortable with the information. I think it was just more clarity for the group. Thanks,
Okay.
Joanne.
Again, I just want to be, Joanne, I'm not trying to argue with you. I just want to be clear that the economic benefits of the project are not relevant to criteria 4.
That's exactly right. But I think you are stepping into that territory. So I would caution you to look at the variances.
And I'd encourage you to focus on the question when I raise issue 4, not to cite economic benefits as a justification for granting the variance.
Point well taken.
So Stephen, to be clear, are you saying that if they weren't asking for a variance, or if it was just the height variance, you feel that they're, so you're saying very clearly that if a conference center met the rear yard setback requirement, you wouldn't think that there would be an impact on the physical environmental conditions. So I just want to be clear that you are saying that you think this extra 10 feet, you're saying that you've moved beyond the issue, you know, that's been decided. It's just that you think the extra 10 feet is the problem. You're muted, Stephen. I'm sorry.
The extra 10 feet on the setback is justified on the explicit basis of chasing and landing very large events that otherwise could not be accommodated. And I am not convinced I am convinced that those events, those small number of events, will have an adverse impact on the physical and environmental conditions.
Okay, I just want to have it for the record. Thank you.
Are we ready to vote on this motion? Yes? No more discussion? I can't see Stephanie nod, but I will assume she's not. I think we're ready to vote, Megan.
Okay, Ms. Charles,
Yes.
Ms. DeShanes,
Yes.
Ms. Egan Engels,
Yes.
Mr. Wolf,
Abstain.
And Mr. Wolf, what's your reason for abstaining?
That I think that the variance is going to have an adverse impact on the physical and environmental conditions in the neighborhood.
So you are voting no. You have to have a reason to abstain.
If I'm not allowed to abstain, I'll vote no.
Okay. All right. Thank you. 3-1.
Okay, so that's done. Thank you for your time, and you will hear from Megan.
Thank you for your time and effort. I know it's a lot of work, and we appreciate your thoughts and diligence in what you're trying to achieve in your positions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, does anybody need a bathroom break, or should we plow ahead to get done sooner? We've got 2 more cases which are much smaller.
I'm fine to continue.
All right, I'm not hearing that anybody needs to get up.
I thought we had one more case. I think I missed one on the binder.
No, there's
North Cayuga Street. What else?
Bryant
there's-
Avenue.
Right,
I missed it.
Bell Sherman thing.
I missed it.
Let me pull
It's
it
okay,
up.
you can catch up with that one from the presentation. Okay, plow
Okay.
ahead.
So bear with me one moment and I'll check on applicants who are here.
Megan, I thought that was very snazzy, your new mapping of who gets a letter. I thought that was a big upgrade. That's cool.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Okay, so I don't see our applicant for 419 North Cayuga, which is next on the agenda, but our applicant for 230 Bryant Avenue is here. Would you like to switch the order?
Sure, that sounds practical.
Okay, let me bring him in and I will bring up the. Okay. Appeal number 3168 for 230 Bryant Avenue. Appeal of Michael Barnowski of Trade Design Build Architecture for an area variance from section 325-8, column 4, off-street parking, column 11, front yard, and column 12, other front yard requirements of the zoning ordinance. The applicant proposes to construct a 3rd-story dormer to provide additional space within an existing apartment as part of a larger renovation and reconfiguration of the building. There are 4 apartments in the building, 2 one-bedroom units, 1 2-bedroom unit, and 1 4-bedroom unit. And the zoning ordinance requires 5 parking spaces for the dwelling. The property has established parking rights and provides 4 off-street parking spaces. The proposed alteration will not allow additional occupancy or require additional off-street parking. However, section 325-32 of the zoning ordinance states that an area variance must be granted to enlarge a non-conforming structure if it does not comply with parking requirements. The dwelling also has existing front yard and other front yard deficiencies that will not be exacerbated by the proposal. The property is located in an R1B residential use district in which the proposed use is permitted pursuant to a use variance granted by the Board of Zoning Appeals in 1948. However, section 325-32 requires that an area variance be granted before a building permit is issued.
Okay, is the applicant ready to give us a little 5-minute presentation, either on highlighting what's in the packet, telling us new information, whatever you want?
Yeah, I'm here. My name is Mike Barnowski. I'm representing Charlie O'Connor and Modern Living Apartments. I don't have much new to add, so I can kind of keep this brief. Okay, sorry. I took the bathroom break that everybody rejected, so I apologize. Okay, so what's going on is, Charlie just purchased 230 Bryant Ave, and the existing building has a 3rd floor. It's basically a 3rd floor bedroom that's part of the larger 2nd floor unit. There's a bedroom. I can go to the floor plan. So you guys can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the 2nd floor unit. And there's a stair up to the third floor. We're currently renovating the stair to make it code compliant. The way it's organized now, there's a pretty bad head knocker up there. That's not the safest condition in the world. And then this third floor unit, currently, if I go to the demo plan, this third, so you come up here with the stair, the headroom's really low. There's about 4 feet of headroom right here. This is sort of the legal bedroom, a small bathroom, and just a kind of bonus room. So, you know, it's that bedroom's, I guess, been grandfathered over the years, but there's basically, if you see my section, there's basically about a 1 foot air section of that third floor that you have a 7 foot headroom in. And then the rest of it is all, you know, it ducks down pretty low. So it's not a pleasant space. You know, he can sort of rent it as is, but we saw a real opportunity to make that space safe by, you know, providing code compliant headroom within the bedroom, improve the light and occupant experience of whoever that bedroom is rented to. We've had asked for a variance for this because, and Megan, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're technically extending the mass and bulk of the building in a building with a parking deficiency. So I just wanted to make it clear that, you know, this change doesn't increase the occupant load of the structure in any way. We're doing reorganizations within the footprint of the building without changing the occupant load. The reorganization doesn't change the parking count required either. It doesn't change the building height, nor are we expanding outside the footprint of the existing building. It's this roof plan sort of shows you the area of the dormer. We're staying within the bounds of the existing roof and just sort of flying off the peak. You know, the last thing is, you know, it's a sturdy building. It's not the most beautiful building in the world. So I think somebody called it a Soviet bunker in a letter to you guys. But we thought it was just an opportunity to add some level, you know, it's not an architectural masterwork by any means, but you know, I think it adds a little bit of interest to the facade of an otherwise pretty drab building. But I think the primary purpose and the thing to focus on is, you know, for you guys, I really think it's an opportunity to improve the safety of the structure. Like, we can get beds in that bedroom. You don't have to worry about a kid jumping out of bed in the middle of the night and smashing their head on the ceiling, trying to get out of the space if there's ever an emergency or anything like that. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Questions? I have one if no one else does.
I just wanted to clarify that that bedroom is legal now, even though it doesn't meet the minimum head height because it was grandfathered a long time, or it was there was a variance a long time ago, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's been legally occupied as a third floor bedroom for as long as the building's been around.
Okay, so people can legally live in that room where you can't stand up.
Yes.
Except for right down the middle, and this dormer is going to make that safer and more pleasant.
Yeah, so he could legally rent the third floor as a bedroom as part of that unit without making any of these changes. It's just, you know, he's really going out of his way, I think, to make it safer and nicer. And I don't know if every landlord under the sun would spend the kind of money that it's going to take to put that dormer in and fix the stair.
Well, I mean, you get increased rents.
Yeah.
Totally out of the goodness of his heart, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, nonetheless, it's not a cheap reno for a space that could already be rented.
So my question was, assuming that you were not out of compliance, grandfathered in for parking in front yard, just doing this dormer wouldn't need a variance on its own. Is that correct? It's to regularize the other things, is that correct, Megan? Maybe Megan is.
It's really only the parking. Even if it was the front yard, he would be allowed to make this change. He is one parking space short, and rather than pave over another portion of the yard, they wanted to come forward with the variance. So it's a section of our code that at some point when we don't have as long of a meeting, I'd love to talk about with the rest of you, that says if you want to expand your structure in any way and you don't meet the minimum lot size or you don't meet the parking requirement, you automatically need a variance. So if you had just the front yard, he would have been okay, but he's one parking space short.
So he's the same number of people as have been parking there forever, but because he's expanding this, and if there was enough parking, putting on this dormer, he's nothing okay.
Nope.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to be clear, the dormer is not going to change this from a single occupancy to a double occupancy. And you don't expect to see a boost in the number of people living in this bedroom, this upgraded bedroom.
No.
Good, it's a non-issue. And Megan, I think that I'm very happy to talk about that because I think that the linkage between people and cars is changing in a positive way. And it would be great to see if that could be changed as an automatic trigger for a required variance.
Great, I would love to move that forward.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Okay, I think we're ready for a public hearing.
I want to hear this comment about the Soviet bunker. I missed that.
So I do have two letters. One, I believe I sent out to all of you from Ellen McAllister and Robert Frank. Did you all receive that?
Yes, we did.
Okay. She did not specifically ask that to be read into the record. So unless you want me to read it, you have it and have had the opportunity to review it. I don't see Soviet bunker, although I do recall reading a certain other term that was excellent.
Oh, maybe
it was good though. It was right up there. But that would be the
I apologize to 230 Bryant.
The second is a very brief email I got this evening that said to the members of the BZA, Ellen McAllister was kind enough to share her letter on the 230 Bryant Avenue zoning appeal. My wife and I live more or less across the street from the site at 225 Bryant. 230 Bryant Avenue is out of character for the area, and Ms. McAllister's analysis strikes us as thoughtful and timely. We would like to go on record in support of her recommendation.
Okay, thank you. And her recommendation was to try to get them to put some new siding over the concrete block, I think.
It was more.
I remember what her letter said.
It said,
I think I printed it out.
yeah, if the applicant were willing to construct architecturally sensitive dormers and even reskin the ugly concrete block exterior surface, then we would not object to the proposal. We would also not object to the parking variance request, although the narrative we received is a bit vague on what the actual parking variance request consists of. And it is hard to explain this very unusual provision of code in a letter, but.
Okay, well, assuming that she has, and you've read her letter, Michael?
Yeah, yep.
Do you want to give a rebuttal briefly to us?
You know, Charlie and I had talked about that, and it's just, it would be a pretty large expense to go through and reskin that entire building and, you know, cement board siding, given the extent of the renovations that are already occurring within the building to modernize it. So we just felt like that really wasn't in the works, in the realm of possibility for us for the building.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, time for a discussion. If anyone's still awake.
Yeah, I think this is an easy decision. I think that we have a property owner willing to make an upgrade. to improve the livability, quality, and safety of an interior space. And it is, I suspect, a very significant investment for almost no increase in square footage. So while it may not go as far as Mrs. McAllister would like in terms of improving the exterior aesthetics, I think adding the visual interest to the dormer is a step in the right direction, and I'm in favor of granting the variance, and I view the parking issue as a non-issue.
Okay, I guess I would point out that her main point is that this building is out of character with the neighborhood, and the variance is not going to make the building more out of character. So we can hardly hold it hostage, the variance, to try to make them make a building prettier that has a mid-century cement block feel. And the dormer is on the other side, so Ellen won't see it from her house. So she'll see what she sees now. That's my comment. Any other comments?
I think the point that we're deliberating here, oh, sorry.
Yeah, we're deliberating.
Yeah, no, I mean, the point we're deliberating here are the variances. And because they're doing this renovation is not affecting the parking. I mean, that's the key for me. If this was an attic, they were turning into a bedroom, I think this would be a longer conversation, but that's a bedroom that they're making into a safer bedroom. So it has no impact on the parking. You know, people who may or may not have cars, and plus it's difficult to park on the street there anyway. So I don't think it's not, you know, with the you know, permits and the different sides of the street and all that. So I if I remember that correctly, I used to live over there. You know, I don't, this isn't adding to additional cars on the street. This isn't increasing congestion in that neighborhood. All it's doing is adding a dormer, and it's not making the building any worse than it already is.
Right, okay. And Stephanie, anything?
I was gonna say too, I feel like this is an easy one to go forward with. We saw a similar case, I don't know, probably a few months ago now, but it was similar. And there was a parking variance, and they didn't even have parking.
Right, okay, so motion.
I'll be
Anyway,
glad to do it.
okay, great.
Megan, what's the variance number, please?
3168.
So in the
Actually,
matter of
Stephen, I was
variance,
going to do it this time, but go ahead.
oh, Suzanne, please go.
Do you want to do it, Stephen? I just couldn't get to my unmute in time. I was going to volunteer.
This is a great softball for you to develop your skill.
And my son's asleep, so it's okay now. Okay. Okay, appeal number
3168.
Yeah, appeal number 3168, property location at 230 Bryant Avenue, applying for a variance to 325-8, columns 4, 11, and 12, off-street parking, front yard, and other front yard. So, of the factors considered, the first factor, whether an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties. No. As far as the street view is concerned, nothing is really changing. Wait a minute, I just wanted to take a break for a second. So Megan, am I talking about the dormer at all here, or just about the parking?
I would link the two of them and just mention that the kind of what you said in the deliberations when you get there, that it doesn't change an increased demand on parking or in this section would be good for that.
Okay, back on the record. Would not change, the variance would not result in an undesirable change in the neighborhood. The dormer that we're talking about here is on the back side of the building. It's, there would not be a change in an increase in cars parked there, or traffic on the street, or congestion on the street parking. Whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by feasible alternative to the variance. Yes, I suppose so. They could keep the existing third floor bedroom as is, and continue to rent out the apartment as they have been for quite a while. But yeah. Okay. Number 3, whether the requested variance is substantial, would say no, you can't really see the dormer we're talking about from the street, and this would have no impact on the number of cars parked on the site. 4, would the variance have an adverse impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood? You know, I'm kind of conflating that with what I said for number 1, but no. As I've said a couple times here, this change would not result, since this is the conversion of an already 1-bedroom apartment to a better 1-bedroom apartment. This would have no effect on the cars parked and traffic. The aesthetic appearance of the house would remain more or less unchanged from the street view, and would not result in increased congestion or cars parked. Whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, yes, they could not improve that 1-bedroom apartment and leave the building exactly the way it's been for many, many years. So that's my motion.
So you move that we
I
grant.
move that we vote yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I
you.
second the motion.
Thank you. I think we're ready for a vote.
Ms. Charles,
Yes.
Ms. DeShanes,
Yes.
Ms. Egan Engels,
Yes.
Mr. Wolf.
Yes,
Okay, thank you. And the motion is granted, and Megan will give you some written affirmation of that whenever that normally happens. Thank you very
Right.
much for waiting through this.
Yeah, thank you guys. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
2.
Right.
All right. So.
we
on
put
to our-
Cayuga Street to sleep.
No, yeah, he's here. He's here. It was
Oh.
a technical issue that was going on. So, but he is here and ready. And this one is right up there with the last one. So, okay. All right. So this is appeal number 3165, 419 North Cayuga Street. Appeal of property owner Barkin Family Realty for an area variance from section 325-8, column 7 lot width, column 11 front yard, and column 13 other side yard requirements of the zoning ordinance. The applicant recently renovated a vacant 4-unit residential building located at 419 North Cayuga Street. The building currently contains 1 one-bedroom unit, 1 two-bedroom unit, and 2 one-bedroom units with studies. The applicant would like to use the study rooms in each of the 2 ground floor units as bedrooms. This change would convert the 2 one-bedroom units with studies to 2 two-bedroom units and would increase the overall occupancy of the building. The proposed change meets New York State Residential Code, and the property has sufficient off-street parking for the proposed occupancy. No further exterior or interior alterations are proposed. However, the proposed increase in occupancy is considered an enlargement of a non-conforming structure. The property is 49 feet wide at the street, and a minimum lot width of 50 feet is required in the R3AA zone. Section 325.32 of the zoning ordinance states that an area variance must be granted before increasing the unrelated occupancy of a property that does not meet the minimum lot size requirements. The property also has existing front yard and other side yard deficiencies that will not be exacerbated by the proposal. The property is located in the R3AA use district in which the proposed use is permitted. However, section 325.32 requires that an area variance be granted before a building permit is issued.
Thank you. Is the applicant here?
He is.
Okay.
All right, can everyone hear me?
Yes, can you tell us your name, and then you have 5 minutes to highlight aspects of your appeal or give us new information or whatever you want.
Sure, I apologize for the technical difficulty. My name's David Barkin. I'm a member owner in the family business that owns this property. I live and work downtown as a housing provider. This house in particular sat vacant for, I believe, 8 years. We purchased it last summer and then since then renovated it. We did have a code review done. We submitted permit drawings. The building permit did approve those building permit drawings. And in those drawings, they had those 2 downstairs units specified as 2 bedrooms. And so in reliance with those drawings, we then moved forward with our interior renovation. We didn't change anything of the exterior. We did, paint the building and new roof, et cetera, things that improve the character of the neighborhood. But as far as enlarging the structure, we did not. We focused on an interior renovation. That renovation really wasn't geared toward, maximizing bedroom counts, things like that. We wanted to make well-sized, spacious units that were amenable to downtown residents. So again, with the building department on board issuing us the permit for those drawings, we had sequential inspections, and we actually received certificates of compliance for each unit as they were completed, and then came online thereafter. So we were all good in that sense as we move forward into our final inspection. At that point, the building department alerted us to a 1-foot road frontage deficiency, and sort of it took us by surprise because in our sense, we didn't realize that we had created this type of issue. All we did, if you reference the drawings, is we changed, let's see, a kitchen into a bedroom in one of the downstairs units. And we reconfigured the layout a little bit in the northern unit on the downstairs. And so we've actually increased the occupancy count, which is permissible under the zoning for that building. And I guess this 1-foot deficiency is what's prohibiting us from calling those 2 bedrooms as bedrooms and utilizing them as such, or having tenants and residents utilize them as such. So it's actually limiting what type of renters can now rent that space and how they can use that space. And it's a desirable location. It's a brand new renovated apartment building. So I think it holds value for the community that a wider variety of options exist to renters, and also, from our stance, to ensure that we don't have damages, that we can't utilize the property as we had envisioned and as we'd had been approved for. That pretty much sums it up on my end. Any questions, please let me know. Again, we're not exacerbating anything. We have sufficient parking. It's a permissible use, and we have received favorable support from neighbors. They were very happy to see this building renovated. It sat dilapidated for years. I considered it a good thing to do this renovation. Any questions, please let me know. I think that should about do it, though.
Questions from the board? I have one question. It might be more to Megan. How were these studies before? It wasn't the size of the property that made, why were these classified as not as bedrooms previously? Do you know, Megan?
I don't. I'm not sure what about.
But does this have to do with that they were classified as studies in the past? What's the? It looks like they could have been grandfathered in as bedrooms at some point, but it didn't happen. Is that?
It could be that. I'm not really sure what the history is of why these two. I don't know, because David, this wasn't part of the reconfiguration. You didn't create these 2 new spaces, correct? So.
Let's see here. We did move around. We changed. Let's see. On the northern unit, there was those three partitions essentially, and one was a living room and one was a bedroom. We swapped that. So we opened up one wall to make that bedroom the living room, and thereby created where the study is now.
Okay.
And
So-
that's 138 square feet hardwired COs, smokes.
Okay, okay.
And,
I'm just trying to figure out.
I'm
just
guessing a square
already-
footage change, Teresa. I didn't, of the room that suddenly made it eligible to have the increased occupants and as a bedroom. But that is a great question. I
Okay,
need to confirm
I'm
it.
just more trying to figure out going forward when it's always unpleasant to see when the building department discovers something at the last minute. So I'm just trying to figure it out, but it's,
Yeah.
we probably don't have time to discuss it right now because I think everyone's had a long enough meeting. And we should just go right to the public hearing. Maybe you can just summarize the many, many letters in support.
Yes, so we received 6 letters of support of this appeal, and I would say in general, nearly all the letters expressed appreciation for the Barkin family's renovation of this property, as they mentioned it had been sitting vacant for several years. And I know I personally have received complaints about it when it was sitting vacant. So I believe that people are very happy to see this back online, offering housing and improving the character of the neighborhood.
Okay, and we don't have anybody here to speak? Correct?
No, there's no one here in person, just
And-
the 6 written comments that we received.
So then we have no one in opposition speaking. Okay, so we can close a public hearing. Discussion.
I think that the trigger that brings this for a variance is unfortunate. And I think that what is requested is not particularly consequential. I think in general, increasing occupancy, on the one hand, it meets the city's goals for increasing available housing. It is allowed under zoning, right?
Yes.
I forget on the details. It's quite late and my brain is fried. There is a parking deficit, which, as I've expressed, I think there's not a parking deficit.
No,
There's some grandfathered. So I think that the fact that the trigger is that he didn't meet the 50 feet, he was only 49 feet, is already evidence that this is not a consequential issue. And the fact that the change being made to the property increases the density. The neighbors are happy about the physical appearance and the investment and the positive change in the neighborhood. So I support the requested variance.
Very good. Any other comments?
No, I support it.
Okay, Stephen, are you ready to make a motion?
Yeah, but I have to navigate my PDF machine and go down to the 5 factors. Hold on here, because I got it. That was pretty good. Megan, what's the number?
3165.
Thanks. So in the matter of variance request 3165 for North Cayuga Street, I move that we grant the requested variance given the following conditions. As 6 interested parties attested, this is a positive. This project is a positive change in the neighborhood, and the requested variance is part of a larger renovation, which enhances this property, which contributes to the character of the neighborhood as an upgrade, as the property had sat vacant for a significant amount of time. The benefit could be achieved through a feasible alternative by simply not converting the studies into bedrooms, but the advantage to the property owner, the ability to make the project pay and to contribute positively to the city's goal of increasing housing in the city seems to make it a fine trade-off for all. Is the requested variance substantial? No, they're not increasing the footprint of the building and just changing how the space is allocated. Would the variance have an adverse impact on the physical and environmental conditions? Well, one might say that a couple extra people and a couple extra cars or visitors could have an impact. No. Given the fact that it sat vacant for a long time, this is clearly positive, and we're supportive of the property owner's intentions and plans. And was the alleged difficulty self-created? Sure, the Barkin family could live without 2 extra bedrooms, but on balance, this is a positive for the private interests and the public interests, and I move that we grant the variance as requested.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, I heard two. Whichever Megan heard first.
Yep. Right.
Any more discussion?
Oh, sorry.
Any more discussion? I think we're ready for a vote.
Ms. Charles,
Yes.
Ms. DeShanes,
Yes.
Ms. Egan Engels,
Yes.
Mr. Wolf.
Yes.
Okay, so that passes unanimously and the 1 foot is now history. And thank you for the beautiful blue color. I like it very much.
Thank you.
Uh, So in due course, you'll get a piece of paper in the mail that will make it all legit and should satisfy the housing inspector. Yay.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you, David. Thanks for your patience for the long meeting.
No, sorry about the difficulties.
Sorry.
Y'all have a good night.
You too.
Good night. Okay.
Feels like it's like 2 in the morning. It is only
Doesn't
like
it?
9:45.
I
It's
know.
not that long.
9:45 is late for me.
It is late for me too, yeah.
Okay, so. do
Even
we-
you're muted.
Megan, I'd like to make a quick comment. Could you, Megan, as the host, there, David has left. So I had started, I think, that suggestion that we should encourage the planning department and the city to join the meeting and to try to explain the history and the context and the horse trading. And in
Yeah.
retrospect, I'm not sure it was a net positive, because what I
Okay.
came away with was the sense that in a public-private partnership, the city is basically the applicant. And
Mhm.
it wasn't, while it was very helpful to have the facts and the history and the context, I think it wasn't all that helpful where for me individually and for the board to deliberate, we're basically confronting City Hall and the whole apparatus,
Okay.
which is not healthy, because
Okay.
the citizen's voice or whatever public interest we represent there's a structural bias. So I think that the impulse that I had to include them probably was misguided. And I think we
Okay.
probably should have had a sidebar meeting, not part of the public hearing, to just collect the relevant information and educate ourselves about whatever it is we wanted to know.
Yeah.
And I found that the dynamic was not appropriate.
I
Okay.
think also, Stephen, the Zoom format is a bit tricky because we can say, now we'll close the public hearing and we'll deliberate. And then they'll chime in, the applicant or the city will be like,
You know-
oh, but let me just say, and we don't usually have that much
that.
flexibility. Stephen Beer says, now find a spot in the audience. And then sometimes people call out from the audience, but mostly they're not right at the microphone. So I think that that's just tricky with the Zoom format, maybe.
I'll have to see if there's a way that we might, at least by Zoom, be able to mute them. I know.
Oh, you
sometimes
can. I do it in my
Yeah,
classes. You
but
can mute
can
them and
they
you can keep
unmute-
it muted. Yeah.
If I mute them, like, can they unmute themselves after I mute them?
There's a way to force it mute. I can't
Okay,
show you how to
I'll
do it
figure
now,
it
but our
out,
IT
yeah.
showed me how to do it. You can make
Okay.
them muted.
That's good to know. So I can look into that. The other thing I talked about with Joanne earlier today on a call was it's very difficult for you all when you're in. So, I mean, it is important to gather the history, but also it gets to a point by the time it comes to you all for a vote, they're very far along in their approval process and in their design process and everything like that. So it puts like extra burden on this board because, the applicants feel like you're backtracking. There's not as much room for flexibility and change. So one of the things that our staff is going to talk about is a way to meaningfully bring the board into the conversation earlier so that it's not to the point where you're like, well, if we vote no, that's it. Like it puts a huge wrench in things, opens up to more lawsuits and things like that. And, we had a similar situation with our landmarks commission where they would get at the end, they'd be in the approval process. They needed the landmarks commission's final approval to move on to get their site plan. but by then they've already been coming to months of planning board meetings and done a lot of design work. So now they have a way to get the Landmarks Commission involved earlier. And
I
I
think that's
know,
a really good idea. Conversely, there have been cases in the past where the public complains, you know, this thing is too tall, this thing is too this, at every single planning board meeting. And then in the end, they don't prevail. And then they come to us and they're like,
yeah,
you are the last hope. You know,
I just want to
and
point
we're
out, we're
like,
still on YouTube.
yes, of course we
Yeah.
are. I know, this is a public meeting. So sometimes people look to us to stop something where our focus narrowly on one little variance.
yes, yeah,
And I think people mistakenly think that we're another step equal, because we don't have as much power as the planning board. They really have discretionary power. We are supposed to follow a very strict legal path. So I think even in those opposite kind of cases, getting us in earlier would be really helpful, if that
Okay.
makes sense. Does that make sense to anyone else?
Yeah, well, I don't know if if you want to bring us, I mean, if we're not going to vote earlier, then I'm not quite sure what it's going to accomplish. It's possible that we could raise our concerns earlier in a way to influence the planning board's thinking and negotiation. My general sense is that the planning board is very pro-development. They hardly see a project they don't like. And I think that the Board of Zoning Appeals has a more conservative mandate. And I think that's our function. I think because we come in late, it's very important that we have a culture and we attract members who are willing to take some heat. If we're all going to roll over because everyone else has put in so much effort and people have already had those arguments, so who am I to stand in the way of progress? I will not be able to participate in a board like that.
yeah, no, I understand that. From my perspective, it might be good to get earlier input so that I know what information you all need to make your decision. So for example, the one with 215 is East State Street, if I could have gotten you all that information for the first meeting, then that would have helped you last month and you wouldn't have had to bring them back again this month. I still think that you have an equal say and should have the right to make your decision, especially with the very strict criteria you have to operate within. I just think it puts you all at a disadvantage when I feel sometimes the applicants are like, well, we've already been through this. Why don't they know it? And you don't have as much of the background. And then you need a piece of information that I didn't think to provide.
Yeah. And it goes both ways. The idea that Bruce thinks just because his giant A has got through some planning procedure binds us, he's got that wrong.
Yeah. Well, I hadn't even thought about that until you brought it up. And then he started doing the measurements and I was like,
There's a
Nope.
15-foot A is
No,
not
that
going to
was
fly.
good. And how are we doing with our new sign ordinance? I know we whined enough that you all said you were working on completely overhauling it. Is that happening soon?
So I have been looking at it. I have to be honest that I would say the biggest change so far is how I apply it, with being that if it's a sign package, I don't approve anything if any of the signs need a variance. So that's been more of a procedural change. But we are working on it. It is but it's been pretty busy lately. And unfortunately, it's not as time deadline oriented as some of the other things. But yes, I would love to get that improved. But I would also really like to improve that section that required those last two cases to come tonight, that for an existing deficiency with very little.
Is that something that other places have where they say if it's de minimis, you don't need to go to BZA?
I'm not sure. Been doing some research on it, but some of what it is the way we word it. And I think for a long time, that piece about the parking and how if you enlarge the structure at all, for a long time, we have used parking as a way to control occupancy. And, you know, as parking's changing, we need to get away from that and really address the concern. So, I mean, I think there's a couple things. I think if it's an existing deficiency that's being exacerbated, it should absolutely come to the board. But if it's not, you know, and then to give them, you know, for variance for something just because they're non-conforming in one area, even though it has nothing to do with what they're proposing. I don't really like that, because ultimately they then have a front yard variance for something else that carries with them when they make a future change. So
I see. Well, Brian McCracken has a whole bunch of things he can approve at staff
he
level.
does.
And he's
Yeah.
got some guideline for that. What, would it be legal if you had some guideline that said, so 1 foot out of 50 is 2%, right?
Mhm.
Something like 2%, or maybe I'm
Yeah.
doing it wrong. If you said if it's under 5% or under 3%, we can approve it at the staff level. Could we look at doing that?
That's a great idea. I will look and see if that's allowed.
It's similar to what they do in Landmark.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll look at that. That's a great idea to look into.
Because I think that it makes people feel like they're being tortured because they have to file all the papers and mail all the
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
and then they have to wait, and then they have to come, and it's very stressful, I think, for the little variances, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So I would like to talk about, hopefully, I think we do have a lighter caseload next month, and maybe we can look at kind of some initial ideas for changing that, and just get your feedback on that before I take it forward any further. Since you're the ones that see all of the cases, you'll have the best idea of what should be coming versus not and that kind of thing.
Okay.
So,
So I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Is that
all right.
correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Great job, Teresa.
Yes,
night.
thank
Bye,
you.
Teresa.
Thank you. Good